different issues. What a great group of people here today, and I can feel all the energy in the room too. That just makes me excited about doing this work over the next few hours. We have to start our meeting today Miss Julia Odell from Grace Communion International Fellowship Group to do our invocation. So I would ask her to go ahead and come, and we'll start our meeting. I'll call us to order. Thank you, Julia, for being with us. You're welcome.
I appreciate the opportunity to pray with you today. Heavenly Father, we thank you for life and the opportunities to daily serve the neighbors you have given to us. We thank you for our country, our state, and the wonderful community where we reside. We thank you for Amarillo's citizens and the leaders that you have called to serve them. We pray for our Mayor, Ginger Nelson, Mayor Pro Tem Frida Powell, and council members Cole Stanley, Eddie Sauer, and Howard Smith. We also pray for our city manager, Jared Miller, and all of the administrative staff and employees that serve the city of Amarillo. Thank you for guiding them and other civic leaders during these very difficult last 3 calendar years. We pray for our families, students, parents, teachers, and administration as the new school year begins. Please give them special protection, help, wisdom, and good physical health and mental well-being this year. We pray for those in our city who help us during emergencies and severe weather, such as the police, fire department, first responders, and EMTs. We pray for all of those who work in the medical and health fields. They have helped us so much. We pray for local businesses, owners, managers, and employees, also for the self-employed, and for those who need jobs, better employment, or new skills. We pray for the poor, the hungry, the homeless, the troubled, families going through turmoil or change, the displaced, the refugees, and all of those who work to give them a better life here in Amarillo. We pray for our senior citizens and the disabled, our veterans, and our soldiers. We pray for our churches, charities, and nonprofit organizations. Father, there are many matters that will be discussed and many decisions that will be made today in this meeting. Please give the council and the participants wisdom, understanding, and clear decision-making with a spirit of cooperation and peace. Help them to use our city's monetary resources wisely as they consider and consent to various matters on the agenda, such as safety, parks, awards, grants, leases, purchases, services, materials, vehicles, utilities, technology, repairs and upgrades, including those for the zoo and the airport, tax assessment, the calendar, and other city business. We humbly thank you for the opportunity to serve our city. In Jesus' name, amen.
Would you join us in saying the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Councilman Howard Smith is going to come to the podium. Please, everyone, have a seat if you want. Is going to come to the podium and start us off with a proclamation today. Howard?
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to present this proclamation. I want to ask a couple of people to come up here, Melody Graves and Chris McGilvery, and if there's others here that pertain to this proclamation. Come on up. Just stand back here. Let me read this as a proclamation. Whereas there are millions of children across the nation who do not have access to quality and relevant books in their homes. And whereas founded by Chris McGilvery in 2022, the Leaders Readers Network consists of a diverse and dedicated group of teachers and students. And whereas in their dedication to equalizing access to quality education, the Leaders Reader Network works with undeserved communities to deliver books and school supplies to children and classrooms in need. And whereas it is the vision of the Leaders Readers Network to empower teachers and students to be lifelong advocates for creating equal access to educational opportunity for all children. Now, therefore, we, Mayor and City Council of the City of Amarillo, do hereby proclaim August 4th, 2022 as Leaders Readers Network Day, and encourage all citizens to support the Leaders Readers Network in their mission to support early literacy in underfunded communities. Given under our hands and seal of office this 4th day of August, signed by Ginger Nelson, Mayor, and Councilmember Cole Stanley, Frida Powell, Eddie Sauer, and myself. So, let me give you this proclamation. Whoever wants to speak, come join us. Hi. You the big speaker? Good. You can have at it.
Do I need to share a few words? Or?
Yes.
Well, I'm honored to be here today with citizens of Amarillo, with my youngest son, Artis, and my team here and far. We all believe education and literacy can change lives, and we're honored to receive this proclamation to honor and celebrate the work that we do to support children, teachers, to share that joy of reading that will invest in our future today. And so thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward for all citizens here in Amarillo to be a part of our work so we can support educators, teachers, and families at underfunded schools with literacy resources. So thank you.
It's his turn.
Can you show me your book? Here. What's that? He's shy. Right now. Okay, thank you.
Before we start, I just want to acknowledge we have so many law enforcement partners in the room with us today. And Chief, I'm excited to hear this report because I think will give us a roadmap for action. But it just, while y'all are here, we want to say how much we appreciate you, how much we appreciate the work that you do for our community. We also have some guests in the room that are from out of town. President Peden, are you in here? There you are. Hi, Todd. They're your guests. You want to introduce us to them?
Recently been working on a pack out for our association. This way people from different areas of the state come in. Just kind of cover.
It's okay.
Last term.
All right. Thank you.
So, right here, we have Michael Glenn. He's the president of Fort Worth Firefighters Association, local 40.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. So we got Chase Rosé. He's with the Texas State Association of Firefighters office out of Austin.
Welcome, Chase.
There we got Jack Todd. He's from Lubbock Firefighter Association 972.
Welcome, Jack.
And then we got Joseph Wallace. He's the president of Lubbock Firefighter Association.
Wonderful. Welcome, Joseph. We appreciate having you guys in town. Thank you, President Peden. And we appreciate the work, obviously, that y'all do in your communities as well. So moving on then to the next thing on our agenda, and that is public address. Before we do that, I want to touch base. We had scheduled today a public hearing on budget issues. And we're actually not, we don't need to do that public hearing today because we have approved a proposed tax rate that is at or below the voter approval tax rate. So because of that, we know we're not going to be calling an election in November, and we don't have to do that public hearing today. So we've postponed the budget and property tax rate public hearings that will allow our council a little bit more time to review and consider the proposed budget. And so we're finalizing those dates when those hearings will happen. So please keep an eye on our website for the notices for those public hearings. I think we'll be posting those dates soon. So I apologize to anybody that's here today anticipating that public hearing, but we definitely invite you to come back when those are rescheduled. If you've got any comments about it, though, the council would love to hear your thoughts and comments about the budget. You can reach us. All of our emails are on the website. And the city secretary's email address is on there, too, if you want to send your comment directly to her. She's really good about pushing it out to the 5 of us as a group. So with that, though, I think we will move to public address. So I will pass the microphone to our moderator, Stephanie Coggins, our city secretary.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for participating in today's city council meeting. Your input and opinions are important to us, and we are glad you're here with us to share them. At each posted meeting, we invite our fellow community members to address City Council regarding posted agenda items. Every speaker has 3 minutes to address the council. At the end of 2.5 minutes, you will hear a warning beep alerting you have 30 seconds to wrap up your thoughts. We ask that you stay within your 3 allotted minutes. Speakers are asked to limit your comments to items on the posted agenda. We do not have any public hearings today, so public address will be our main public speaking time. When you come to the microphone, please state your name, whether or not you live in Amarillo city limits, and if you are speaking for, on, or against the agenda items that you are addressing council on today. So again, thank you for being here today. We have 9 citizens signed up for public address, so we will start with Noah Dawson. And on deck after Mr. Dawson will be Denny Deaver.
I just wanted to say for our city secretary, I think when I signed up, I only said I was speaking on 1E. I'm also going to be speaking against 3A and 3B.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
All right, so I'm Noah Dawson, still living in Amarillo. So on 1E, that does kind of tie into the public hearings because I am hoping that the this council is taking the time to further vet the city budget, and also I'm hoping especially that y'all will take Mr. Stanley's comments at the last meeting into more careful consideration, because he made some excellent points there. We shouldn't be taxing people before the debt's actually issued. It's kind of absurd to be doing that. But I do also hope that those dates will be put forward to the public for those hearings fairly soon, because especially with these meetings being in the middle of the day, I know that a lot of people have to do quite a bit of planning and rearranging of their day just to show up to these meetings, unlike how it was when they were in the evenings. Now for items 3A and 3B, typically when I would be speaking on items such as 3A, I would focus my comments on my principled criticisms of taxpayer-funded lobbying. But I actually have another issue with that. On the agenda packet that's posted online, the resolution keeps mentioning Exhibit A, which I'm presuming lists the city's legislative priorities. However, I say assuming because Exhibit A isn't on the online packet. So I am hoping at the very least that this council will delay taking action on this item until a version of the agenda packet for a future meeting can list what those priorities are, so that the public can actually know what they are, take it into consideration, and speak on those issues if they have comments. Because unless I'm missing it, Exhibit A is not on the packet. For 3B, it does mention a couple priorities that y'all want the Texas Municipal League to take up. Item A, item A, I'm getting them mixed up in my head. I should have written down my notes more clearly. That's what I get for trying to think through this speech at midnight last night when going through that 166-page document. Well, regardless, one of them seems a bit more concerned with the fact that the city lost the 2021 Prop A election. I think the reasoning there is a little thin. For the other one, really, y'all are wanting the state to, again, raise the rates that y'all can tax. Why am I not surprised?
Thank you, Mr. Dawson. Next, Denny Deaver, and on deck after Mr. Deaver will be Thomas Warren III.
Well, to be honest with you, I think this gentleman covered about what I was going to say. I just think that on the agenda, that item 2A is what I have approval of last meeting's minutes on the property tax increase. I think the hearings is what I was concerned about, is that we are going to have public hearings, I guess, aren't we?
Yes, by
Yes.
law, yes.
By law, that's what I thought. Okay, and but you don't know when.
No, the dates aren't set yet.
Dates aren't set yet. Okay, well, that's basically what I was interested in. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Deaver. Next, Thomas Warren III, and on deck, James Skank.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. It's been a couple of years since the last time I was here at a council meeting to speak, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I will be speaking on agenda item 3B, and I also want to make a comment about 3D and E. So I have the incredible opportunity right now to be the State Republican Executive Committeeman for District 31 here in the great state of Texas, representing the Panhandle all the way down to the Permian Basin. And as many of you may be aware, one of the legislative priorities this past legislative session for the RPT was abolishing taxpayer-funded lobbying. Our lawmakers did not get that done this session. Hopefully they will next session, as it was one of the, I think, 15 items that we discussed as final possibilities for our legislative priorities. But here in Amarillo, we are once again furthering taxpayer-funded lobbying by pushing 3B. And when you actually look at what the items in 3B are, I think Mr. Dawson said it well. There's not really a great justification for either one of the items. The first item, which would change the way that items are listed on the ballot for city propositions, it would just confuse voters more. And then the second item, it's just another way to tax people who spend nights here in Amarillo. It doesn't seem like that's a great reasoning to do either one of these items, especially with the taxing item. You know, we talked about the hot tax for years when we were doing Hodgetown and all of that, and they said, oh yes, there's more than enough hot tax money to go around for all the projects. So if that was true, why are we trying to raise our hot tax possibilities? And then as far as 3D and E are concerned, you know, we just had the hearing a few weeks ago with the Fairley lawsuit, and I think it shed a lot of light on the way that debt is issued here in the city of Amarillo. And, you know, looking at what we learned from that hearing, we learned that it's possible that the city council may have violated the Texas Open Meetings Act by participating in a rolling quorum, or even by publishing an incorrect agenda for that meeting. Nothing's going to happen about it, though, because there's no teeth to the Texas Open Meetings Act. So with 3D and E in mind, I think it's amazing that we're doubling down on debt issuances. We shouldn't be doing it. But as far as violating the Texas Open Meetings Act and the last debt issuance the city council did, I'm very excited to announce that the Potter County Republican Party just passed a resolution asking our legislators to make violations of the rolling quorum provision of the Open Meetings Act a state jail felony during the next legislative session. And I hope they take that up during the session. I hope our lawmakers listen. So I appreciate y'all's time, and have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. James Skank. And on deck after Mr. Skank will be Deepak Patel.
James Skank, City. I want to talk first about something a little different. We're fixing to have on the agenda today the PDP meeting that I went through the last 10 or 11 months with Lloyd and our consultants. And I just want to state my issue with not signing on to that was the fact that we kept having definitions, which y'all will probably see, of a fully funded future growth assessment. And to me, that's a bureaucratic nightmare. That's one where we'll fund things that we have no idea what we're going to run into with current funding, with current money. That's a tax and spend agenda if I've ever heard one. And when we started it, we had the premise that we were led down that the city had no other way of having money, which we all know that's really not true on infrastructure. So I'm not signing. The consultants did a good job of taking us down a road that it was very clear to us very quickly that they wanted us to go down to where we're going to say, hey, for example, let's start up a new streets enterprise operation where we'll put that on the water bill or something. Sounds good on its face on some level, but you know, has no opportunity for voter approval. Fees are just another way of getting around us being able to say something about it. 3D and E. It is in relationship to the budget, and the budget as I see it right now, correct me if I'm wrong, we actually had a rollback to 41 cents from the 44 cents. Okay, and then now we're going to go up to 49 plus cents. That's an 8-cent increase. That's about 20%. And how we get around to where that's not hitting with this 3.5% cap on property tax increase is just beyond me. And maybe in the next few weeks or whatever, we'll hear some explanation, because we haven't as of yet, I haven't, from even the early budget meetings, because you could have had 41 cents would have gotten you, because of property valuations, got you all the money that you had in the last budget. And then you're going to go up 8 cents. That's another go-around that voters are against. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skank. Next, Deepak Patel. And on deck after Mr. Patel is Mac Patel.
Good evening, all. My name is Deepak Patel, 46 Colonial Drive, Amarillo, Texas. Just 2 minutes ago, we pray, God, help us last 3 critical years we passed through this country. And now we raise the tax, 2% tax, for our cross the country, our tourists. They honor Amarillo to stay 1 more night in Amarillo, and they have to pay 2% more tax is unacceptable. And 65 plus today 11, 67 hotels honors against these things, and couple more they out of towns. To almost 70 hotels against of this 2% raises the tax. All studies, cities spend millions of dollars. In a reality, all fakes. Why we spend millions of dollars? All this study is a fake. Convention hotel study, all hotels, in areas hotels full by the citywide convention, because convention hotels bring a lot of convention. Result is zero. We lost. City lost millions of dollars last 5 years in occupancy tax. They collect the tax, city reimburse tax back to hotels. City and state both lost revenue for the hot tax, and next 15 years more, we lost again. So almost we close to $20 million loss in occupancy tax plus property tax. They have some rebate in a property tax. These hotels maybe $500,000 a year, 20 years, almost 100 years we lose this thing. What happened? Couple local politicians, partners of 50% that hotels, and this benefit goes to their personal pockets. And our hoteliers, I built 9 hotels in this town. Almost my investment over $60 million, $80 million in this town. I not catch any single penny from this town. Another thing we pray, right now we pray for the senior citizen and our disabled peoples. These hotels cross the roads, cross the pathway for the pedestrian pathway from the Globe News to the parking garage couple times, and I request December 14, 2021, that time hotels change ownership. This passage pathway in hotel contract, in a page number pathway, they have not put the hotel passage pedestrian, and all these citizens have to walk in a bad weather in a city street. So please just consider our request and don't raise the tax. Put the passage pathway for our senior citizen and disabled people, cross hotel to the parking garage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. Mac Patel.
Stephanie, I just want to pause for a second. There may be some confusion about an item on the agenda. There's nothing on the agenda today about our city raising taxes. There's something on the legislative agenda about the legislature considering even giving the city the capacity to do that. Right now, we don't even have the capacity to do that. So I just wanted to clarify that discussion's not on our agenda. I think there might be a misunderstanding about what that is. So if Mr. Patel, if you want more information about that, would be happy to do a meeting with you. So. I'm sorry, haven't recognized you. I'm going to give it back to the city secretary. I'm just trying to give further explanation about what's actually on the agenda today for the business the city council is going to be doing. So back to the city secretary, please.
Mac Patel. And on deck after Mac Patel is Jatin Bhakta.
Thank you, City Council. Thank you, Mayor, for speaking with me over here. And I'm here just to oppose the 2% hotel tax. I know you say it's not on the city agenda right now, but I'm just here to oppose the 2% tax on hotel tax. So if you can consider that, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Jatin Bhakta. And on deck, Apurva Kondar.
Hi. And good evening. And I oppose for 3B like a hotel tax, 2%. That's I oppose. No more agenda today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhakta. Next, Mr. Kondar. On deck after him will be Sam Patel.
Dear Mayor and Council members, as you just mentioned, it is not agenda, but we thought it was, and it is part of that probably, discussing about increasing hot tax. After consideration and hearing the proposal from CVC last meeting, we find out that all the hotel owners like to voice our strongest opposition to the proposal of any additional 2% or any other hot tax for city of Amarillo. The hotel industry needs time to recover and navigate this tough time and adjust new times before placing more burden on this particular industry. This industry, as well as restaurant industry, is kind of a lifeline to our city. So we encourage and we appreciate if you do not increase any taxes on the hot tax. The burdens that we have taken as an industry from various projects downtown have not been a substantial driver of the revenue. It's actually a burden. So we encourage again not to increase anymore. In closing, we want to make sure that the city council members are aware that the local Amarillo hotel and motel owners strongly oppose this method of funding additional projects downtown. This will hurt but not help our ability to fully recover and have a vibrant business environment. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Sam Patel. Okay. Mr. Patel does not wish to speak. Mayor, this concludes public address.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item number 1. Is there anything in your packet, Council, that you need further information on or that you have any questions about before we get started with our business today?
No, Mayor.
Okay, hearing nothing, let's move on to agenda item 1B, updates from council members serving on outside boards and commissions. Report, Councilmember Smith from the Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Advisory Committee.
I'll be glad to make a report. Unfortunately, I missed 3/4 of the meeting, but Donnie Hooper sent me a report.
Oh, good
I'm
for
gonna
Donnie.
read that. Donnie Hooper reviewed and gave a presentation on the current bike master plan. We discussed its purpose and also the history of how the plan was formed and the revisions that it has gone through. Donnie also gave us a brief presentation on the process that the city has to take in order to acquire right-of-way for future bike trails. We discussed using existing utility easements for possible locations of new trails that would connect parks and other areas to existing trails or paths. And then board members Terry Gingrich and Melinda Landry, they're fairly new members, gave us an update on how to improve walkability in Amarillo. That subcommittee is now gathering information to perform a walkability study, starting first with the areas that surround schools in Amarillo. That concludes the report I got from him. Any questions?
Nope, no questions.
Good.
All right, let's move on for an update from Councilmember Sauer on Parks and Rec Advisory Board.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. So this report really, coming from Parks and Recreations, in some ways, the big season for Parks and Rec is kind of winding down when you get to the end of the summer, because a lot of the activities that they are a part of are actually during the summer. And so we had an aquatics update, and on the aquatic update, it was a really good season. There were no major incidents that occurred.
at any of the pools, and so it was a very successful season. So successful that Thompson Park actually made $177,000 for the summer, which was 67% of all the pool revenue for the entire summer. So it's been a really, really good opportunity to have that pool become available in the city of Amarillo and to see the use that it's actually ended up having. And so that's gone on very well. The programs for the summer have turned out very well, including, Starlight Cinema, Starlight Theater. They had a Hooked on Fishing camp. They had kids' summer camps. And actually, the Parks and Rec Department will be the ones who will be facilitating the State of the City on September the 10th. And I think they're going to do an incredibly good job. They do such a good job at programming. And from listening to them talk and the things that they already had on the agenda and things that they had planned, it will be an incredibly great time. Also, one of the great things also was the zoo update. Personally, I kind of wondered whenever I first came on council in 2017 what was going to actually happen with our zoo. I mean, there was a lot of struggle with the zoo. The Friends of the Zoo basically disbanded and gave their money into the zoo department, and so it just didn't look like things were going well. And then, just like we should expect out of Michael Kashiba, he figures a way to make things really work. And so kudos again to Michael and his department. They've done an incredible job. They're doing a bunch of renovations, and when you just think that things are about to kind of collapse all of a sudden, now then they've got new animals that are coming in to be part of the zoo. They've got two twin black bears. They've got twin bobcats that they have brought on. They've got coyotes. They've actually got a bird-eater tarantula. So I think they kind of want to see that. So supposedly it's the biggest, isn't it the biggest tarantula there is? And I mean, that's a big tarantula if it's going to be a bird eater, right? So anyway, I mean, it kind of piques your interest, doesn't it? And then how can you not help with the chupacabra showing up out on the cameras out there, and it just kind of basically gives them a video that goes viral. And now that they're selling wanted posters out of the zoo gift shop of wanted and a picture of the chupacabra. So the zoo's really worked really hard, and there's also being some money that is being put back into it. The bear barn is being reshingled. They're replacing light fixtures. They're working on animal safety things out there. They're working on the monkey holding window. They're working on the cat building. There's a lot that's going on out there, it's really good to see some life being infused back into the zoo, and the possibility of the zoo becoming another great. It is a great asset, but for it to become even a bigger asset. I can't go on without talking about the playground updates. So we're in the middle of the renovation process at Stephen F. Austin Southeast and Memorial. Thompson Park is estimated to be done early in the spring of 2023. And so now that we're talking about some of our big parks that are actually getting some facelifts and some renovations on the playground equipment, and they're much needed. And it is a really good use of ARPA money and the things that have been going on with that. Let's see what else is going on. And then also, I know that some of it has, and I think we've already passed the date when people were coming to talk about this. We designated $600,000 of the ARPA money to be eligible for senior services programs, and the Parks and Recreation Department are the ones that are going to facilitate the gathering in of those who are looking for part of that money for their organization, and they're the ones that are also going to be helping make the decision on who gets that. Let's see. And that's pretty much the other things that were on there. Just to kind of give you, there's some things that usually end up in our book that I will just kind of highlight some things that have happened, like the golf operations between the two golf courses, Ross Rogers and Comanche Trail. they've had over 12,000 rounds played this year. And their fiscal year is about 64,000. And so they have basically done an incredible job of coming in. When we first started talking to them about trying to cut that $2 million deficit that we just didn't feel like was possible, now then they've cut it well under $1 million, and it's down to like about $600,000 is the difference. And so that is so they are working really hard at actually making their part of the Parks and Recreation Department, making it pay for itself and making it become self-sustaining. In the zoo, they had, well, most of this is in terms of dollars, but they have had an incredibly good summer. They had $23,000 worth of admissions, so that's a lot of people attending the park. Whenever you consider, what is it to get into the zoo? Is it $4? $4. So that, if we were to extrapolate that out, that is a lot of visits that have actually ended up at the zoo. So that's really good. Athletic department has been very successful. They have worked really hard at making available a lot of things, and one of the big ones that's kind of come up on the scene is pickleball, and they actually had 29 teams in a spring pickleball league, and so they've had, and their tennis league has done well. And so what I would say is, whenever we look back at what's happening with parks and recreations, it's been a very successful summer, and their programming has been great, and excuse me, and they're making some really good strides in that department, and it's all really to do with the fact of having Michael as the head of that department and the people that are working underneath them, and you can really tell that they're passionate about the stuff that they're doing, and I'm grateful for the work they're doing.
Fantastic report. Questions for Councilmember Sauer? No? All right, Eddie, thank you for that report. I'm going to jump down and just do a little bit of change on our agenda order here, if y'all bear with me on that. Item 3C is an item that I think we have quite a few people in the room today for, and so as a courtesy to their schedules, I think it would be a great idea for us to go down to that in the agenda and go ahead and call that project up. So I'll do that. It is considering a lease agreement between the City of Amarillo and the Friends. There are many, I would add, of A.J. Swope. So, Mr. City Manager, I think we just have Wendy, but I'm not sure who our city staff member is that's kind of working this project.
Well, I've been working with them, and a number of staff have been working with them. What I'd like to do is just to go ahead and bring up Wendy and Gary and any other members of the Friends of A.J. Swope that would like to do this. And in preface, as we've seen, there's in our nation today, there's so few things that everybody can agree on. But I think this, a first responder memorial, is something that we can all agree on, and it's fun. I mean, it's serious and somber topic, but it's also refreshing to talk about something that everybody agrees on. We all agree on this. So with that introduction, Wendy, come on up, and whether it's Wes or Gary or Chief or whoever you want to bring up with you.
Y'all can stare at
and I still, Gary Pittner, how long have you been retired? 4 years? 4 years. I guarantee you he goes running in the mornings in a tie.
Oh, well.
Well, thank you all so very much for allowing us the opportunity to share our vision for the Texas Panhandle First Responders Memorial. As many of you know, sitting up here, when we first started this venture pre-COVID, it was actually 3 different projects that were going to be located in one central location. But since that time, we have been afforded the opportunity to split up each of those projects, letting them stand alone on their own piece of land in different parts of Amarillo. And we feel strongly in our hearts that that's the best way forward for all of these projects. The first part of the project that we worked on, which was the A.J. Swope Performance Plaza, is under construction, and we will make an announcement in January of 2023 regarding that. The second part of the project, which is why we're here today, is the Texas Panhandle First Responders Memorial, and that is now our main focus. So we've partnered with Sims and Architects to design the memorial, which you can see video. Now you can see video and pictures up here on the screen. As you are about to see, the centerpiece of this memorial is water, which cascades down behind the names of our fallen first responders. Now, on this visual, the responders' names are on one big piece. That's not how we envision it. We're actually going to have each responder's name on its own individual plaque. Because there's going to be water involved, we need to be able to take it off and either repair or clean it. So that's our vision for that. It will also feature beautiful landscaping that goes all the way around, and you can see the very brightly colored trees that they've chosen to go around. And finally, it'll have a multicolored lighting portion of it, so it can be changed to honor our law enforcement officers, firefighters, and EMS personnel as we need. We stand here today with the complete support of our local first responders. All of you have a letter of support in front of you that was signed by Amarillo Police Chief Martin Birkenfeld, Potter County Sheriff Brian Thomas, Randall County Sheriff Chris Forbes, Fire Chief Jason Mays, Amarillo Medical Services Chief Will Hinden, President of the Amarillo Police Officers Association, Sergeant Toby Hudson, Commissioner H.R. Kelly from Potter County, and the 100 Club of the Texas Panhandle Executive Director Suzanne Talley, many of which are in the audience today. This group has provided valuable guidance and continued support as we have pivoted this project to honor 89 of their fallen brothers and sisters. So today is a milestone not only for Friends of A.J. Swope, but for all of our first responders. And so, again, we appreciate the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
If I could, Mayor.
Sure, Mr.
We had
City Manager.
originally been looking, when Wendy talked about, we had originally looked at consolidating all of these things that we're doing through the Friends of A.J. Swope together in one site. It was just south of the ballpark, and it wasn't the most visible location. So they found an amazingly visible location for the performance area. And I don't think we ever talked about exactly where this is. So this is already a little pocket park right south of the CVB building, the chamber, the
historic Bivens
historic
home
Bivens
that is
home
now
on
our
Polk
Chamber of
Street.
Commerce.
Yes, ma'am. Just south of 10th Street. So it will be using that exact same footprint and just changing what's going on there. And it'll be a long-term lease with the Friends of A.J. Swope to enable the Texas Panhandle First Responders Memorial to be there. I just wanted y'all to know exactly where it was.
Thank you for that explanation. Any questions from the council for Wendy?
Excited.
No questions, but I got a comment.
Okay, give a comment.
So, Wendy, I've watched you work on this for a really, really long time. And you and your close group of friends that have done this. And I just want to commend you for sticking with it and keep pushing through until this, which is very important for this to be in place. And so thank you for keep pushing forward and not giving up. I think there's a couple of times if I was in your position, I might have kind of given up. I mean, it kind of looked like everything had been turned upside down. And so I just want to commend you guys for keeping the work going forward. It's such a worthy cause, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. We've been able to do so with support from our mayor and council the whole step of the way. So thank you all for believing in our vision, and thanks to all our Panhandle first responders for backing us up since day one and being there to help us through this.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, with that, then, do we have a motion?
Yes, Mayor, we do. I move to approve a lease agreement between the City of Amarillo and Friends of A.J. Swope for a 0.130 acre tract of land located at 1018 South Polk Street here in Amarillo, Texas.
Second.
It's been moved by the Mayor Pro Tem and actually seconded by Councilmember Sauer and Councilmember Smith to approve this lease between the City of Amarillo and the Friends of A.J. Swope for the purpose of honoring and memorializing the loss of first responders across the entire Texas Panhandle. Any discussion or questions about the motion? Mr. Smith?
I'm just curious if any other members here interested in this want to make any comments about how we ought to vote.
Oh, you know Gary Pittner's got some words.
He's got a tie and he has comments.
My reputation is still out there. No, I just want to say, I've had a chance to do some research over the years. These are 89 of our friends and neighbors across the Texas Panhandle area that have given their lives in public service. We want to make this very much about those 89 individuals. The first loss of life was back in the 1880s when an Oldham County deputy was shot and killed outside a saloon at Old Tascosa. That was the first one. In the middle 1950s, we had one of the most disastrous firefighter loss of life in U.S. history when the McKee refinery, operated by Shamrock Oil and Gas Company at the time, Valero, between Dumas and Dalhart, exploded on that early Sunday morning back in July of 1956. 19 firefighters lost their lives that morning. Most of the Sunray Fire Department was instantly lost, and a good portion of the Dumas Fire Department lost that morning. There were 35 boys and girls lost their daddies instantly at 6:30 a.m. that Sunday morning. And then going to a more recent time, back in 2000, many of us remember this, when the Lifestar aircraft went down, the helicopter went down on a foggy March morning. They had been to Boise City, Oklahoma, to pick up a 4-month-old infant to bring back to our Northwest Texas hospital here. And that chopper went down just this side of the Oklahoma line in Dallam County. We lost all 3 members of that flight crew and that 4-month-old baby. So every one of these 89, there's a story there. We're going to tell that story. There will be QR codes there where people can identify the individual they're interested in, and not only read the story, but also an audio version where they can hear these stories told. So I just think it's just been a wonderful opportunity, and I'm so pleased to have had the opportunity to participate. And all we need is about $1 million.
Well, I was going to say, before we finish, please tell people how they can participate.
We will be spending calendar year 23, raising the resources, probably begin construction early in 24. And you can go to the A.J. Swope website, and there's a secure pledge opportunity, and the site is friendsofajswope.org. And you'll be hearing more from us on the fundraising side as we progress. But we're thrilled to get this step accomplished in terms of getting our spot nailed down. It's a beautiful, contemplative spot. You can hear the church bells ringing from First Pres, First Baptist, and Polk Street Methodist. And so it's just an ideal location for the site and something the Panhandle can be very proud of. We anticipate for decades to come. So thank you all so very much for being our partners in this.
It sounds wonderful. Yeah. Mr. City Manager, anything to comment before we vote?
No, ma'am. I'm excited about the project. And Wendy has been diligent and a dog on a bone, just never given up, like you said, through COVID. Because we talked about this before COVID, I think. So this has been going a long time, and her patience is commendable.
Yeah, I agree.
Diligence.
Well, with that, I will call the question. All of those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes with a 5-0 vote. And Wendy, just our sincerest thank you and gratitude to the work behind this, everyone on the committee, and all our first responders in the room. We appreciate you. We appreciate the work that you do, the risks that you take, and we want to honor those who have given the ultimate price in order to serve our community. And I also love that when I travel outside the city often, Amarillo has a reputation. We are in an amazing season of growth right now and opportunity. But I recognize that one of our superpowers is that we think regionally. We think of ourselves as a regional community. And there are not many other places in our nation that do that. And back to what the city manager was saying, I actually think that we agree on maybe 95% of the things that we do in day-to-day life. And so we should be looking for ways to show the things that we're united behind, and united as larger regional communities, I think, is even better. So thank you all for casting a vision that allows us to do that. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of casting vision, we're coming back to agenda item section 1, and we'll do item C, which is discuss partners for development progress. A very big project, a very big vision, and a very important presentation. So if you don't mind, Lloyd, we'll give just a second to let folks clear. Wonderful. Okay, Mr. City Manager, I'll pass it to you, and you can hand it to Lloyd if you want.
All right. As the facilitator of the entire PDP process, I'm going to go ahead and throw it to Lloyd Brown to give us the presentation. It's going to wrap up everything that the Partnership for Development Progress Committee has been working on over time. We've also got a number of staff members that can assist or in addition to Lloyd, answer any questions council might have. So with that said, Lloyd, take it away. Lloyd's good.
Thank you, Mr. Manager and City Council. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to serve in this role. It's been one of the most inspiring things that I've had the opportunity to do. What a wonderful group of citizens that we have that serve on this committee. And if, for those of you that served, if you'd stand up and just let everybody see that you served on the committee. And they're representing the hard work that we put in. And I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize the efforts of our staff. Our committee put in over 600 man hours just as the citizen volunteers. And I know that our employees of the city and administration, along with Kimley Horn, did an amazing job. We had our first meeting on December the 7th of 2021, and we had our final summation meeting on August 9th of 2022. Our committee was extremely diverse. We represented all the zip codes inside the loop of 335 of Amarillo. We had very diverse experiences on the committee, and our age ranges were from in their 20s to in their 70s. I want to use one of my favorite books, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, to let you know the process that we went through. The first habit, be proactive. We worked on proactively setting the boundaries of our committee and expectations. We agreed on how we would respect each other, and then we started the process of defining our why statement, which is our mission statement that I'll introduce in a minute. This process took 3 meetings and a lot of passion, and quite frankly got to the heart of the matter, and several were very emotional. By doing this, we practiced habit number 2, and we begun our process with the end in mind. That is where our why statement came, which is now our mission statement, creating a comprehensive city roadmap to grow, sustain, and develop opportunities for Amarillo. This created a vision that guided our decisions, and it helped us set our priorities as we move forward, which led us to practice first things first. We had to understand in the areas regarding infrastructure, what are we working on today that is urgent and important? And then secondarily, what is important but not urgent? That led us to the process of thinking win-win. We started looking at mutually beneficial win-win solutions and agreements, and we valued and respected each other's opinions. That led us to habit number 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. We practiced empathic listening skills to genuinely understand each other and our perspectives, which compelled reciprocation and active listening. with an open mind and asking really hard questions. It helped us create an atmosphere of caring and positive problem solving. And most importantly, even though we didn't agree all the time, we respected each other all the time. So that meant that we brought a lot of synergy, which is habit number 6, and everybody came together with our combined strengths and positive teamwork. We then broke into subcommittees to look at the 4 areas of infrastructure we're going to discuss today. And it allowed us to learn and seek solutions that no one could have done alone, which led us to habit number 7, sharpening the saw and continual improvement. And so this is the foundation that sets the presentation that we have today. And I hope I'm doing this correctly. There we go. So again, I'm going to repeat our mission statement: creating a comprehensive city roadmap to grow, sustain, and develop opportunity for Amarillo. We had 34 citizens accept the invitation to be on the committee. 3 of those resigned, and unfortunately, one of our members that resigned passed away during this time. We had 27 active members, and what we define an active member is that you attended a majority of the meetings and you voted on the polling that we submitted to each member during this process. These are the members that served on the committee, which some of you have met today that have stood. And this is the zip codes that I referred to, and the number of people from each zip code that represented our community. As you can see, there was a high density in 79109. But what was important was to get a really diverse group of citizens with experiences that were diverse, and also creative ideas on how we move forward. These are the occupations of the citizens who served, and you can see the diversity there. This brings us to the area of identifying the issue as we started our process. And as a group, we and subcommittees coming together, we all agreed that the current funding for basic infrastructure is not currently able to fully fund the necessary maintenance, operations, planning, and growth for the city of Amarillo. The existing funding deficit is largely a result of a long history of failing to plan, act, and adequately fund essential infrastructure replacement. Our primary recommendation is the city should evaluate the rates and the funding of all basic infrastructure and ensure that they fully fund the necessary operations, maintenance, planning, and growth. When the basic infrastructure is fully funded through respective enterprise accounts, the city should consider a general tax reduction. Out of the 27 active members, 85.2% of our members signed this recommendation. One of the biggest things, and I can tell you the most passionate part, the committee was, quite frankly, very upset that none of us had the knowledge of the funding challenges that we have within the city. And our current way of communicating that over the years, and this is not just respective to this council, but as a history for our city, we really need to find a way to communicate the challenges that we have. And the committee, we're recommending that the city should implement concise, proactive, public outreach and messaging to provide education and communication to our cities to the underfunded state of the infrastructure, and then our proposed solutions. So our next area was breakdown. Our primary recommendation is the same that we read to the city. to the community just a minute ago, but I want to call out the red are the areas that we're underfunded for the next 10 years, or 5 years, excuse me. That brings to light how we need to look at what our funding is. The green is the part that the city has funded through an enterprise fund, which is on your water bill, and the additional monies are made up either through bonds or from property taxes, we understand. If we look at the next one, which is wastewater, much better, almost fully funded, which is an exciting place to be because as we go through the others, we're not there. But again, we have a wastewater enterprise fund, and our challenge from a total dollar amount is much less challenging. Mm-hmm. On the next area that the subcommittee dove into is drainage. Everybody knows in Amarillo we have drainage challenges, and it's because we get 4 rains a year to get 20 inches. And when that happens, we have challenges. And a lot of it comes from underfunding, and the priorities for our community has to make based on that. So, again, a significant amount of underfunding for the drainage area. And our last one is streets. Streets doesn't have an enterprise fund. Our primary recommendation of the committee is to create an enterprise fund. All of the funding currently funding from the streets comes from either bonds and or property tax, which of course is the way that we fund our bonds. I think probably the most important thing to take away from the committee's recommendations is most of our members, if not all of the members, believe our city has a duty to provide adequate funded infrastructure. And in doing so, enterprise funds in the way that we do water, wastewater, and drainage, those monies raised have boundaries. They can only be spent on those specific items. And we feel like we owe the community, if we raise funds, that those funds are implemented and spent in that area. It also gives the ability to be much more proactive than waiting on large bonds like the one that was back in 2016 and figuring out how to efficiently utilize those funds. We felt like as a committee that the ability to project the needs of the community, to plan for the needs of the community, were best going to be funded through enterprise funds. So on conclusion, again, communicate, and educate about the underfunded state of our infrastructure. We want the funding of the infrastructure through the enterprise funds. They have the statutory protection that I discussed, and the fees that are charged to the citizens pay for services that are promised. I like to think promise made, promise kept. And then finally, these recommendations are the beginning steps. This isn't the end all, but it's the beginning of creating a comprehensive city roadmap to grow, sustain, and develop opportunities for Amarillo. And at this time, I'm open for questions, and I know we have great people here to help answer them.
First of all, Lloyd, I want to say thank you on behalf of the council for taking on this leadership mantle of leading this process with the PDP committee. A very diverse and large group of citizens with many good ideas and many different perspectives. So I think the council members were included and attended many of the sessions. Actually, we were invited every single time. Of course, there are scheduling issues, but there was a council member present at every single meeting, and most of the time there was a majority of the council present. So we've been on this journey with you, and it was something that we were aware of. It's why we created the committee. But thank you for leading it. And I hope you will thank Mrs. Brown as well for giving you permission to lead the committee. You've done an excellent job, but it's been a tremendous amount of time, personal time taken away from you and your family, your business, to serve and to lead this committee. So we really do appreciate the effort. It's been done with excellence, and we appreciate the effort that you've put into it. So,
my pleasure. And I would just like to say the committee was so grateful for all of your participation. It really gave us additional energy and strength to know how important it is to this council to really address this issue.
Questions or comments for Lloyd? Maybe we should let's just start down here with Councilmember Sauer.
Okay, so in the thought of starting a enterprise fund that funds streets, did you all look at what best practices were going on in other cities? Are other cities also being in the position where they're being forced to have to consider looking at how are we going to fund some underfunded things, and are they considering or have considered and already have in place? Are we seeing enterprise funds showing up in other places of similar cities, like just for, say, Texas, not much less the rest of the U.S., since we're somewhat of a country unto ourselves?
You bet. Yes, sir, there are. And that's one of the things, all the information that we glean from to learn is on the website, the PDP website. And there are other cities that have implemented street funds. It's not a majority of cities. Jeff, you could probably share some of the cities that are of our size that have started implementing or are in the process of implementing street funds, and they are doing that, yes, sir.
So could we because actually it was somewhat of a new concept when I was beginning to think about being involved with City Council, could we have an explanation of exactly what an enterprise fund, because I know there's people out there watching this and they're kind of going, what the heck is an enterprise fund, and what does it do, and why do we even have them, and what would be the purpose for it, and why would it even be in place?
Jared, who do you want to pitch that to?
Floyd.
You're up, Floyd.
Thank you.
Floyd Hartman, Assistant City Manager, key staff liaison to this entire process.
No, good question. And Lloyd, I want to express my appreciation for the leadership in the committee and the consultant, but staff, Kyle, your group, and the other staff that helped, Stephanie, helped in coordination. But an enterprise fund, back in the funding of a public entity, city, local government funding, you have the tax-based funding, which is general fund, which the majority of that is tax-based. Enterprise funds are fee-based, such as our water and sewer utility, our drainage fee, those types of things, where there is actually a fee based in another state law where you charge a fee to fund that enterprise, and that's hence enterprise fund, that enterprise of water and sewer. So it's fee-based rather than tax-based.
And they pay for themselves, correct? That's the whole idea behind it.
Self-supporting entity like water and sewer is what the goal of an enterprise fund is, the drainage utility, a self-supporting enterprise within the local government.
Just like even our airport's on an enterprise fund.
Yes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I hope that would be a simple enough explanation so that the general public would begin to understand exactly why this is being set in place. We have to come up with a way to pay for this $384 million basically deficit to take care of the streets. And every time that I've run for office, that's been one of the number one things is we want our streets taken care of better than what they are. And we've got a $384 million deficit of needs that need to be done, and the only way we can do that is then to try and develop some way to pay for it instead of it coming out of our general budget or our CIP or any of those other things. So,
and to your point, it appeared to us that the city's having to make really difficult choices because the money needed for streets is a very large amount of money. And it's competing with the quality of life issues and the protection of life issues with police, fire, and the other things that are really important to our community. How do we, over a long period of time, provide a promise of great streets when it's competing against everything else? And it hit us in a lot of areas that, again, back to the Covey statement, our city's having to live in the area of urgent and important because we're having to fix rapidly aging infrastructure. I was blown away when we were brought in a piece of wood sewer pipe from San Jacinto that had just been removed this last year. And to, look at something that old and then to realize my neighborhood is Wolfland and the takeaway sewer is approaching 90 years old. And it's just, we have a very aging infrastructure and we don't have, a sinking fund to take care of that. So we've got to figure out how to start doing it today to plan for tomorrow because it's coming.
Now, also, whenever we go this route, doesn't that also give us the ability to free up that money that was in the general budget that we were spending on these streets can now be used for other things in the general budget while this fund is actually being leveraged to take care of our streets. And so in essence, it actually frees up the ability for other things that need to be taken care of in the city and puts the streets on their own playing field, so to speak.
I think it dovetails nicely with the way we've shifted to do CIP in the last 6-7 years, so that rather than CIP just having to wait and see what is left over from the last year's budget and live off the crumbs of the table, so to say, CIP has a dedicated funding source, and that allows them to plan with more certainty those long-range projects, all of which have lots of zeros and commas on their price tag. But this, rather than, this is how much we have this year, okay, well, we can't do a project that has this. So I watch you guys every year. You're doing the shuffling of prioritizing projects based on the amount of dollars we have left over from our budget year. And I could see the benefit of, and I hear that in what the citizens were saying, which is dedicate funds that we know are going to go to our streets. You know how much we're behind. You know how much it costs to do it every year. Let's work that down to a number and get started on having dedicated street funds every single year. That's what I heard from the meetings.
Doesn't another one of the things that end up coming out of this is from watching our enterprise funds, those funds have the best bond ratings. We get the lowest interest rate. Therefore, it is the best use of that money that is paid for at the lowest possible percentage rate that's out there on the market.
And one of the things we discussed is, what are the unintended consequences? And they'll be good and they'll be bad. But one of the things is contractors we have a great number of great contractors in Amarillo. But the type of equipment they need to do really big jobs is a massive investment. It gives contractors, both local and national, the ability to say, we're going to invest in Amarillo and we're going to be here to do the work, because they know it's not going to be, hey, we're going to come in and do a bond and then we're going to shrink back. It gives the ability to be systematic, proactive. And one thing that we noticed is that the studies that are done on our streets and looking at the age of the dollars that we gave up there, most of those are in 2016 or older dollars. That's the last time that the surveys for those areas were done. We suspect that the dollars are actually much larger. And the ability to have predictable income allows staff to do the studies, to keep them updated so there aren't surprises in the future. They know what's going on. If you don't plan your work, you can't work your plan, and you end up living in chaos, and that's a quadrant one life, and our citizens in our city deserve better.
I'm through.
Yes, okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes. So, Lloyd, thank you so much. I appreciate you and your committee. What are the next steps, and how can we better educate our citizens regarding the general funding? Because most citizens do not understand that governmental finance is totally, totally different from personal finance. It's not even close.
There's a great document that was created at the beginning, and it basically was a dollar bill, and it showed where there were buckets of money, basically the revenue resources, and where those areas, that really helped the committee understand the difference between property tax and general funds from fees to enterprise funds, and how those had boundaries. And I think it's really utilizing great graphics, pictures, and then having team members available to communicate this is how it works. And the amount of work that staff put in to provide those resources. As far as next steps, I know that Floyd and his team are looking at providing those, what that looks like, and I know that Kimley Horn has given them a process map of what would be required to go through and provide the council the information that they need at another date.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Stanley?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mayor. Lloyd, man, if you'll indulge me, I just want to butter you up as much as I can before I ask you to do something. So I really like that jacket. That is a good-looking jacket. And I really appreciate your professionalism. I attended most of these meetings. You did an excellent job. You took a group of people that it would be hard to decide lunch with and get everybody on the same page. And you broke them apart and you led them down this road. And this is not an easy road to go down. This is not an easy problem to help solve. And I appreciate your willingness to volunteer and try to lead. And I think you've done a really good job. So saying that, I have some questions that I hope are difficult questions and that we can provide some good answers for, to where we can look at this and say, okay, you know what, doesn't necessarily sound good to me on the front end, but I do see the overall, or I see it different now. So let me ask you, and if you don't know, I may direct this to City Manager. You know, we have a set tax rate. We have a certain amount of money that is dedicated in that set tax rate right now in our budget. We know what our CIP kind of forecast is. Can we take that and can we give ourselves an amount of pennies that we would say, okay, this is how much of this 44 cents is now going to streets? And then, you know, could we then take that and say, okay, well, this would be the offset if we were to do this system. We need to now revenue this much money, and then we can build out fill in the blanks of the things that I haven't been presented yet. Does that make sense? And Jared, is that a good question for you?
I think it's a better question for them.
Yeah, I was going to say I can answer the question. I didn't know if Floyd wanted to jump in there. I mean, Lloyd. I mean, y'all have names too close together, I just realized.
Lloyd and Floyd.
One letter. The general fund is made up of a number of different revenue sources. So I don't know that we allocate any tax rate just to street projects. However, if we were to equate the amount of money that we spend on streets in any given year to tax rate, I can do that. This coming year, we have budgeted right at $13 million for street projects. If we use a rough rule of thumb that we generate about $1.2 million in revenue per every penny of tax rate, and that's going to move every year. It's going to be we're going to actually generate a little bit more in following years as property values go up. But let's just use that as our rule of thumb because it's very close right now. We're at almost 11 cents that we're spending on streets this next year. Now, a grain of salt on a lot of different things there. We don't spend the same amount on streets every single year because it really depends on the number of capital projects, how much overlay we're doing on any year, how our staffing is. You know, there's a variety of variables that go in there. But this next year, we're going to spend, if council approves the budget, around $13 million on streets. So that does equate, if we only spent property tax money to do that, and we don't segment it that way, it would be around almost 11 cents that we would spend on that.
So I think consistency is key. I know as a builder, it's something we look for. So as I'm looking out a year, 2 years in advance, I need to know that my city is dependable, reliable, and I equate that all the way to family. And so as we live in this community, we need to be mindful that we want a consistent expectation of kind of moving forward. And I think that's what you're going after with this. You feel like it'd be more reliable to set up an enterprise fund. Otherwise, you wouldn't have brought this up as a potential solution. And look at streets as an enterprise fund that would be funded through a fee and not on a tax. And so if we then were to say, okay, well, we have 10 cents, 11 cents here that we would reduce our tax rate and not forfeit any of our existing budgets. I didn't compromise any of the other 45 departments' budget by doing that. Then we would have a standalone item that then I feel like we could look at and do a better job of understanding, like, what is the impact of this and how do we move forward. At that point, then hopefully we'd be able to take, because if you take it on surface value, if I just said, hey, we're going to spend $13 million on a $390 million problem, I mean, you guys would look at me and say, well, it's not a real good strategic plan, Mr. Stanley. But if I said, hey, we're going to look at, and over the next 20 years we need to accomplish this, and then start over, and I know Kyle can do that very well. Then what we can formulate is that fee basis based on how many people we have that are investing in our community in whatever form or fashion you guys have that proposed. So that would be what I would ask for so that this doesn't get, go ahead, Floyd.
If you don't mind, can I weigh in on right there?
Yes, sir.
Boy, do you mind raising your microphone up just a little? Thanks.
That's a good point. So where this document is, what's been prepared from the PDP to this point is a roadmap, a guide. Where we're going right with this discussion is in the details of what is the next steps. What are the next steps from PDP? If we agree that this is the roadmap, then all of the evaluation of the specifics, such as what ifs, if then, related to funding and what is funded through those processes. In each category and each recommendation that was made will have staff will be working with either consultants or internally and with the elected officials, and in some cases with committees. The comprehensive plan that Andrew will be doing is one piece of this. What I'm saying is we're getting into the next steps of what should be brought forward. Are you agreeing that this is the roadmap to those next steps? Mm-hmm. And then those next steps go into all those details that you just brought up in a discussion that goes back and forth between staff, consultants, mm-hmm. and the council with updates to where we want to get to what that accomplishes.
And I would love to try to help direct
yes.
in why I complimented your jacket
yes.
and appreciate you so much. I believe that these next steps are very important. And so what I'd like to ask is your opinion. Do you think it would be helpful to take those 27 members? I know you broke them up into small committees. Mm-hmm. Would it be helpful to bring those 27 members back and council and staff and be able to put this proposal in front of that entire group and be able to let that entire group work on the solution, because you do have some negatives and you have some positives out of there. And so as a point of concern, regulation, my tax rate is regulated. So I cannot arbitrarily double the tax impact on you in my general fund. And so this fee, would we want to set some parameters in so that we can provide reliability, sustainability, not only for my staff but for my citizens, so that it doesn't go from a $10 a month fee to a $20 a month fee in one meeting. That's just one small thing here. So your opinion on getting everybody back together for another meeting?
As long as I'm going to speak for myself because I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I would be honored to lead another meeting and invite our members to join us. And I'll just speak to James's concern, which I think is aligned. One of the things about the enterprise fund, every year it's going to be voted on by our council. Mm-hmm. And if council changes from year to year or every 2 years, you may choose as a council to do things differently. You don't have an option today on streets to do things differently. You have only an option to provide resources for our community really through the standard practices that you do today. Having an enterprise fund would give the opportunity, but again, it's about trust. It's about being part of a representative republic, which is what you guys are for our community. And Cole, I agree. The really down and dirty hard work is coming. This is our goal is to provide a roadmap to help our city grow sustain and grow as we move forward.
And I know that we may have those detailed questions. We're going to have them. But I'm curious as to if we just put a pin in that and we just said, what are the next steps? What are those next steps?
Barring council guidance to scrap, or scrap's too strong a word, but to not take the input of the committee, what we would propose doing would be to bring a resolution at an upcoming meeting, possibly the next meeting, or whenever council has given enough input to adopt this as a guiding document, and then start the work of creating whatever fees and evaluating whatever fees need to be imposed, whether it is for revising the water and wastewater rate to take care of projects. Admittedly, the delta there was a little bit less. Evaluating a street maintenance fee to be able to address the street maintenance shortfalls. Typically, and what I would recommend in those situations, is that we bring on consultants that are well trained in creating and evaluating the challenge and creating the fees to address specific identified needs. So it's not an open-ended deal. It's not something that's just let's create a pot of money and we'll spend it on what we're going to spend it on. It would be, but it is definitely a level of expertise and technicality that the committee, I'm going to speculate, and certainly city staff, is not prepared to create on its own. We can evaluate the product of the consultants, but I would recommend that we go through that process in partnership and in conjunction with the comprehensive planning process, which we've just recently kicked off. So it would be a very scientific, regimented process to identify the appropriate fees to address each one of these stated needs in the subcommittees that Lloyd's group, that the citizen group was working on.
So I agree. And with Lloyd, I mean, you've got 600 man hours with this group, and I think it's important to continue to utilize all of that synergy, everything that, and you created the vision statement. So let's not dogleg this away from our vision statement into a consulting firm that we lose kind of the ground that we started on. And then this is the important part, I think, of kind of putting the ingredients in here before we put this in the oven and it comes out already baked. And so I want to be a part of this. I want you guys to be a part of this. I want to help Mr. Sneederjohn the most that I can with this opportunity. And I'm not saying that this is a bad idea or that I stand against it in any way. I'm saying this is a new idea. And like any good new idea, it needs to be very well thought out. And I'm agreeing with staff that consulting and continuing to move forward. The only place that I would disagree is a resolution or something brought back, in 2 weeks where we already are going a direction. Let's take time. Let's meet again. Let's continue our conversation before we put it back in front of council where it's an up or down vote.
And I think there may be some confusion there about what council might be voting on. I'm just going to speak from my point of view as council is you guys have spent 600 plus hours putting this recommendation together, and I think we would be having a discussion as to whether or not what's been brought to us is the general direction that we should go in.
Yes, that's what this letter would accomplish with a resolution. Another area, just to describe how another area has a resolution. The outside the city service resolution defines the goals and objectives of providing water and sewer outside the city service. That was passed in 2002 by the city council at the time. So when somebody comes in and asks for outside the city service, we start with that as the guideline that was directed by the mayor and the council at the time. And so that's how this document would be treated. It would be a guiding document in the decision-making process and what we bring forward to discuss with council, and also what we work towards in changing the design standards, the subdivision ordinance. There's so many trails of this that you can't go over it in a short discussion. One thing I would add on the rate study, we have the rate study in the upcoming budget to renew for water and sewer. So the first component of water and sewer is to get those professionals on board in relation to what the rates do, what they pay for, what they cover, and how it would look in covering this need that's identified by this guiding document. So the resolution actually just sets it in motion, and you could bring that resolution back any time as a council to change that resolution.
Cole, what do you want the next step to be? Because what I'm hearing is that
Yes, ma'am.
none of our staff team, none of the council, and none of the citizens committee have the project-specific expertise to do the next step. Like, we need to hire a consultant that helps us calculate what we should be spending every year and back that out of our tax rate. We need to hire a consultant that tells us if we did an enterprise fee, what kind of rates would we be setting? I can't calculate that, but I'm wondering just what do you think the next step needs to be?
So I want to be helpful and being in agreement with a consulting firm to come back in along with this committee of members that were carefully selected, along with all of their research data, along with staff moving forward in filling in all of the blanks on this, because there's so many things that we don't understand and we don't know. There's a lot of corners we can't see around right now. And so being able to do that before we say, okay, we would like, an enterprise fund for streets. And this is a resolution that says we want to proceed with an enterprise fund for streets. We don't know what that'll look like. We don't know how that'll work, but we want to put it on an agenda. We want to vote on it. What we would avoid is what we have earlier today in public comment, where it is citizen after citizen of like, that doesn't sound good. I don't want that. I can't see the details. I don't know what's going to happen. And legitimate concerns for people that are spending the monies that they have to pay their property taxes, pay their utility bills, and still have enough money to go buy groceries. So what I would like is to go slow, take your time, make good decisions, bring everyone together. You did a fantastic job of laying out the 7 habits of highly effective people. Not one of them says to do all of that and then hire a consultant.
Okay, but
and step back.
What specifically is your next step? Because we're 10 months into this process, so I think we're on board with absolutely going at the pace we need to go to get the information. What do you want to do as the next step?
I would propose to get the 27 members back in a room and have a discussion over this to see how close we can get before we need that consultant.
What do you mean close we can get?
How close can they get in this roadmap that they've envisioned? How close can staff and council get to saying, okay, this is what we foresee, and then we're able to take something that's already got a structure, something that has a vision, to a consultant?
Lloyd, do you see that there? I guess I'm confused because I think they've done what they can do based on the expertise they have in the room, and I think they will be a resource for us going forward to come back to citizens once we have an expert analysis. But I think the next step is expert analysis. And I think the only way we get that is to hire a consultant. But I'm listening.
I appreciate the discussion, and I'm not opposed to hiring a consultant. So if there's a procedural item on an agenda to hire a consultant to understand more data and do a discovery, more or less here, and then for this to go back to the committee and go back to staff and go back to council in the format that we started in, then I would be in agreement with that, and I think that's a good plan.
Okay, great. I think that's where we're going.
I'd just like to clarify. Our why statement is what our recommendation is. The how and the what we do is for the professionals that are educated on what it takes.
Good.
The committee, I think, is really good at asking questions to get clarification, and that's what our role has been. And there's been, I'll just tell you, there's been a lot of vigorous debate of what is right, and this is not a unanimous recommendation. However, it is a supermajority recommendation of this committee that this roadmap, because the biggest challenge that we have, period, is funding. That is the resource, and it comes from a history of our city of not planning for replacement of our infrastructure that is now upwards of 90 and 100 years old in many parts of our community. And what is not aging out, much of it is too small for this robust, dynamic community. So I don't know how you do it unless you have somebody highly competent, and that's where I see the having consultants like the Kimley Horn team that has such a broad array of experience and understands how to get the information that we don't have, because sometimes it's knowing where to get it. So I think it's both and.
Can
Cole.
I ask one other question?
You bet.
Do we not have a consultant hired already for this PDP program?
Yes, sir.
And
They've been
are they
wonderful.
not like the most effective and qualified people for this exact type of industry and roadmap?
I can't make a statement
I mean,
to that, but
let
they
me
have
give-
been
let me answer
fantastic
my own
for our
question. I
team to
thought
work
we
with.
hired the consultant that we believed could get us all the way there. So do we not already have
That's
the
an excellent
consultants in the
idea.
room?
Excellent idea.
We have Kimley Horn. They are recognized as one of the best in all of these things. They weren't hired to do all of these different studies. They were hired to help with this PDP process.
But could they be?
They could be. And so we don't need multiple consultants to do multiple different projects. We could be as simple as one consultant to do multiple different projects. They are different projects.
But
You know,
could,
a drainage
could that
study,
be the next
a
step in our
streets,
process?
you know, it
Good
could
idea.
be. It could be. And that would be something that would come out of the resolution, taking this as kind of a guiding document, using that committee as a sounding board as we go through all these processes. But they are recognized as one of the best. I won't say they're the best, and I'm not insulting Kimley Horn by saying that. I'm just saying they are one of the recognized experts in this. We will be using experience from many different cities across the state of Texas that forms a best practice body of work. Some of those cities you're going to love. Some of those cities you won't love. They all come together, though, to create the best practice and body of work of ideas that we can draw from, or we can create our own. We're not going to bind ourselves or limit ourselves, but absolutely, Kimley Horn's one of the best. Don't hear me say, I didn't say the best. I don't want to give him a big head.
So we have, before you speak there, Floyd, we have the team together. I think we've done good. Lloyd, I think your investment and your time is well spent. Let's keep the team together as we move forward, and let's go step by step in mapping this out. And then let's make a good decision as a group and a council. Is this the right road to take?
Okay. First
Yeah,
off,
back to that, Floyd.
First off,
And I do want to give you a minute to comment. But
a professional services contract is based off qualifications. And obviously what we've experienced with this contractor is a high level of qualifications. So those can be worked forward. We'll work with the legal team and see how and what. The scope that we have them under contract doesn't necessarily cover this piece. So there again, we can work through that. Obviously, we have a qualified contractor consultant to talk to. But I wanted to go back to a statement I made earlier. There's multiple avenues that this document sends us down. This is one avenue of probably 20. So where are we when we get to the standard specifications manual that is a component of this that we have to upgrade? Where are we in relation to the team? You said you want to keep this team doing it. But when I get to the standard specifications manual, I'm going to have the local engineering firms engaged in that. So I have to shift components of this plan to another team. If I stick, and this one can be engaged in that, but I have to bring in the local engineering firms as a component of the standard specifications review. When I do the subdivision ordinance changes and proposals to council, this team is great as a citizens committee, but I need the development community more engaged in the subdivision ordinance to get it right. So when we say it has to be the exact same team on every avenue that I go down, we're going to miss a very important component of our community if we don't expand that into the appropriate community engagement that we need to do on each challenge. So this guiding document says we're going to do these things. Underneath that is all of these things I've talked about, comprehensive plan being one, subdivision ordinance, standard specifications, but then on this specific topic, we very well have the firm that needs to go forward. So I would suggest that instead of trying to make it global on every one of the paths forward, we need to identify what is best on each one of those as we take those steps. That approving this document through a resolution would set us on that path. as staff to have the confidence, okay, they want to go forward with these things, and here's how we see that. We bring that back in a recommendation before we go make that higher, okay?
Okay. Ann, do you want to, Ann Scamhorn was on our committee as a citizen, and just, I noticed she had a comment a moment ago.
Yes, and thank you very much, Mayor, for the invitation to be on the committee. It was an honor to work with the staff and the council very much. I think you asked us to provide what, and we did, what needs to be done. I don't think we provided how. And to respect what Floyd and Lloyd and the consulting firm are saying, we don't really know how in terms of the engineering, but we know as citizens what is appropriate. We see those water bills and the different fees, and what can we stand, what is possible, and how do we make this come true, because we've got to do something.
Thank you. That's good perspective.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Smith, any questions for Lloyd?
Boy, y'all covered a lot of territory.
I know we did. We're leaving you to back cleanup.
No, you're not. First, let me say I like your jacket. I enjoyed attending the meetings. I think I missed one. And when you broke into, at the first, you invited us council members to sit back at the back, and then you broke into groups, and I decided I'm going to join a group, and I did. I was with a drainage group one week, and then the streets group the other times. And the people in both of those groups, they took all this very seriously. I was proud that they, what you said, 85% were on board here, and some dropped by the wayside. But I get to the bottom line, I think we need to adopt this. That's not adopting any rate. That's yet to be determined, and we need the experts to help us. But I'd love it if all of these members would continue. We can invite them to continue, but we need some other experts too. And so I'd like to see us, this wasn't an action item today, but I'd like to see at the next meeting to accept your report and proceed to make plans to continue further. It'll be several months probably.
Yeah. Okay. So do we have a consensus toward that, to add this to the next agenda as an action item to receive the report, and then to entertain hiring, hopefully, maybe our same consultant, and keep our same, committee as a resource to moving forward in this process? I think the report gives us a what, and now we need to start working on the how.
So, Mayor, isn't this the kind of the same thing that almost exactly the same thing that we went through when we went through with parks? So we basically had a parks assessment, and they assessed where we were with the parks and what was important and what needed to happen, and it engaged the entire community, engaged the stakeholders, engaged us. They came back to us with saying, okay, here's the state of the union. Now then, you guys, these are the things that you're going to need to address going forward. And then we had a resolution. We hired a firm to then go through and meet with people, do the whole thing all over again, but now come with the how. And that's basically all that this is amounting to, is we're doing exactly the same thing with a major issue in our city that we've done with all the other major issues in our city. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a good summary. Okay. Lloyd, thank you. And it sounds like we're going to leave you guys in the wings, because you've got 20 plus hours each committee member in studying this, so you know a lot more than the average citizen knows about these issues. And I think it is wise counsel for us to continue to check in with you and also use you as communicators out in the community to help citizens understand what you now understand. So, all right. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to getting that officially on the agenda. Before we take a break, which I think everybody needs a bathroom break, we have a time crunch with regard to one of the items on our action agenda. It has some end of business day requirements with it. So I'd like to go ahead and do that, and that's item 3D and 3E. Oh, sorry. Yeah, both of those bonds, right, Laura? Both of those projects have end-of-day timeframes to them. So, Mr. City Manager, if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and do 3D and 3E.
All right, Mayor. I've got Laura Storrs, Assistant City Manager, Chief Financial Officer, to introduce the item and our guest. Laura? 3D, $57 million of water and wastewater projects.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. Thank you for being willing to consider this item a little earlier, as we are meeting some time constraints. And so we have two items for consideration on your agenda. Both of these items have been put into the current approved budget, the capital projects, and part of the water and sewer, which is item 3D, was actually approved a few years back through a rate increase. However, we never issued the debt for it and have not proceeded with the projects until now. And so we're looking to go ahead and complete what we had budgeted back in the 18-19 fiscal year. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Stephen Adams, who is our financial advisor with Specialized Public Finance, to give a couple of presentations, and then I will add a few comments and be available to answer questions.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Stephen Adams with Specialized Public Finance. This first item is for the sale of water and sewer revenue bonds. The sale is in the amount of $52,590,000. It's to purchase water rights. It's for a Northeast Interceptor sewer line, a pump station on 34th Street, and an Osage Street ozone replacement and some repairs. We did sell these bonds over a 20-year term. They do have a 10-year call. They're rated AA+ by Standard & Poor's. So we took bids this morning at 9 o'clock for these bonds. We received 11 bids. The winning bidder was Citigroup Capital Markets, and the reason they're so interested, until this council passes and accepts this bid, the people they've sold these bonds to can cancel their orders, and it's a pretty good amount of money, so that's why we appreciate, and they appreciate you moving this up. If you approve this, once we go through the Attorney General process, we will close on or in about September the 13th. Just to let you see the winning, all of the bids. The bids came from many places around the country. The cover bid was FHN Financial Group, and then you see the host of bidders that bid coming in behind Citigroup. This is the debt service on the bonds. You see the coupons of 5% and 4%. They are higher than their actual yield on the bonds, so we will be receiving a premium, so we just reduced the par amount because we didn't need any extra money. I'm going to skip that and go to this because it's so small. They're the same data, just in two different formats. The top red line is the city's last year's net revenues available to pay debt service. The green is the outstanding debt of the city, including self-supporting certificates of obligation. The gray you see in the middle is CRMWA debt that the city owes, and the blue debt is this bond issue. So there is plenty of coverage, and you can see the coverage will be getting larger over time, with even though the city will probably be issuing debt in the future as its capital needs are pretty great. We talked about the coupon rates being higher than the yield on the bonds. In order to get higher coupon rates, the winning bidder had to give extra money to the city in the form of a premium. We needed $57,192,000 for the projects and cost of issuance. So you see the par amount was only $52,590,000. The rest of that's made up by a premium that was paid to the city by the winning bidder.
Citigroup. Just to let you see, over the last, since the 1960s, here's where revenue bonds have been on an interest rate perspective. So you can see still pretty low compared to back in the 80s and even back into the late teens. So a good time to be selling debt for a city. And with that, Mayor, we recommend that the city award the $52,590,000 water and sewer revenue bonds, new series 2022, to Citigroup Capital Markets, Inc.
Thank you, Stephen. Council, questions for Stephen or Laura about this?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Do we have a motion with regard to item 3D?
Yes, Mayor, we do. I move to adopt ordinance number 8002 to authorize the issuance of City of Amarillo, Texas Waterworks and Sewer System Revenue Bonds, new series 2022, prescribing the forms, terms, and provisions of said bonds, pledging the net revenues of the city's waterworks and sewer system to the payment of the principal of and interest on said bonds, enacting provisions incident and related to the issuance, payment, security, sale, and delivery of said bonds, and providing an effective date.
Second.
It's been moved by the Mayor Pro Tem and seconded by Councilman Sauer to approve item 3D. Any discussion or questions about the motion? Okay. Hearing none, all of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, that passes with the 5-0 vote. Move on to item 3E. Laura?
Okay, on item 3E, we have an ordinance authorizing the city to issue tax notes series 2022B. This is a need that the city has for $8 million in order to fund updated financial software, which is actually an enterprise resource planning software. It touches almost every aspect of what the city does. Our current system is about 20 plus years old. It is no longer being developed or maintained by the software provider, and it does have an end of life coming. So we must make some sort of a change. What we are looking at is to utilize for the general funds portion of this project for the upfront implementation cost and the project management aspects associated with this software. We're looking to utilize $4 million out of this debt issuance. The other $4 million would be for replacement of fuel islands out at our service center. Those have been in need of upgrade and replacement for the past few years. And so this half, the $4 million, would be funded through existing revenues that come through our fleet services department at this point in time. Going back to the $4 million associated with the financial ERP software, we are proposing that those are funded by the property tax rate. What we are looking at is the impact would eventually go to 0.4 of a penny to fund this financial software. However, once this debt issuance would be paid off in 7 years, that amount would already be in the tax rate. And as most of you are aware, software continues to change and evolve over time. This would allow a continued funding source without impacting property taxpayers in the future in order to ensure the city always has good, solid financial and enterprise resource planning software in place to ensure that we don't get into a situation like we are right now where we are way past needing to replace this software package. So with that, I will hand it over to Stephen Adams for a presentation, and then I will be available to answer questions.
Thank you, Laura. Again, 30 minutes after we took the bids on the water and sewer bonds, we took bids on these tax notes. In this case, the winning bidder was Mesro Finance at a 2.18%. Bond sold with their AAA rating. And it was a lower rate than the water and sewer, primarily because it's just a shorter duration. Notice we got fewer bids, and it didn't include Citibank. This is just not big enough for these big banks to participate in. So mostly regional banks bid on this and did a really fine job for us. This is the debt service on the entire project of the entire tax notes. Again, we will receive a premium because the coupon rates of 5% are much higher than the 2.18 yield that they'll be receiving. So the par amount's only $7,345,000 in this scenario. Now, Laura talked about there are two funding sources, so they're almost equal, breaking them into two different pieces. The fuel island is about $620,000 a year, and in the first year, the software is $160,000 in debt service, but then it becomes about $700,000 for years 24 through 29. Again, the sources and uses, we have $8 million for the two projects. We will receive a $732,000 and some change premium, so the par amount that we need is $7,345,000. I think you've already seen the interest rates and chart. So with that, we do recommend that the city award the $7,345,000 tax note series 2022B to Misero Financial Inc.
Thank you, Stephen. Council, what questions do you have for Laura or Stephen about this project?
So I do
Councilmember
have
Stanley.
some, Mayor. Laura, if I could ask you some questions here. My math is probably wrong, and I'd ask you to help me kind of understand what we're doing here. So the note is an $8 million note, $4 million, and I'm not disputing the needs on either. So you need the software, you need the fuel islands.
Yes, sir.
But the path at which you've chosen to pay for these have a long-term tax impact. So that $8 million tax note impacts our tax rate how much?
So only half of the payment would come from property tax rate, and it would be starting in year 2024 when the amount jumps up to about $700,000. It would be 4/10 of a penny.
So the 4/10 of a penny is not on the $8 million, it's on the $4 million.
That is correct.
So that's where my math is wrong. I don't understand why we don't have a $4 million revenue bond, because we're justifying the fuel island through revenues out of fleet.
Yes, and so, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so our fleet revenues are not a pledgeable security for a debt issuance, and so the full note has to have the property tax as the pledge for the issuance. And so there's not, if we were to be using something like water and sewer revenues or drainage revenues, those could be a combination of tax and revenue notes, but our fleet revenues are not a pledgeable revenue source, and so the full amount has to be pledged by the property tax rate. However, we're only going to pay half of it from the property tax rate, and the other half is coming from our fleet revenues.
So the concern I have is we're increasing our tax rate, what equates to an $8 million revenue, on 0.404, 4 pennies?
We are increasing our, Jenny, can you, or maybe I have the ability to go back to the presentation.
And I'm not belaboring the point, I'm just saying, like, it's a 7-year tax note.
Yes.
And the good news in that is you're going to more or less lease software at this point. Even though you're taking out a tax note, software is going to need to be updated in 5 to 7 years, and so you're going to have that in the budget. We wouldn't need to do this again. I see the benefit in that. Fuel islands are not a 7-year life span or expectancy, and if I'm correct. So, like, I would hope, Floyd, are these 20, 30-year fuel islands anyway?
Yes, that is
30
correct.
year? So do we have any other mechanisms that we can use so that we don't have to put it all in a tax note? Do we have any money in fleet that could pay for this? Do we have any cash on hand? Do we have any existing, or I'd say excess revenues, sales tax, anything like that in general fund?
So on this slide, if y'all can see that on your screens, it's broken down between the two uses, the fuel islands and the software. And so you'll see that on, let's see, 1, 2, 3, the fourth column where it says total debt service under fuel islands is $4.3 million over the life of the notes. That all will come from the existing fleet revenues. So then if you go to the second to last column where you see $4.384 million, that's the amount that's going to go on the property tax rate. However, the pledge is all backed by the property taxes. That is not what we're going to we're not going to utilize the full payments for both amounts from the property tax. We're only paying the $4,384,000 from property tax. That's what translates to the 0.4 of a penny. The rest of it will come off of our existing fleet revenues.
And as in layman's terms,
I'm
does
sorry.
that mean that really the only part that's landing on property tax rate is the software?
That is correct.
Right.
That is correct. And so it's similar to a mortgage where your house is backing the mortgage. In this case, our property tax rate is backing the debt service, but you might use all sorts of means to actually pay for the debt. And in our case, we're going to use two different sources to pay the debt. Half will come from our existing fleet services revenue. It's already built into the budget. It's already ongoing. The other half is what we're looking to apply to the property tax rate beginning in next fiscal year, which would be the 23-24 fiscal
So when
year.
that fuel debt is paid off,
Yes.
it's not on the property tax
It's not.
rate.
It doesn't affect
your
anything.
future concern about that, I think, is a great question, but
And
it's not being structured that way. So
That is correct, and we didn't structure this as, for instance, maybe a CO or a longer-term debt instrument because, for one thing, it's relatively speaking, so bear with me, it's a relatively small amount of money, $4 million for the fuel islands. Combining it together, this makes a little bit more of a debt issuance that entities would be interested in bidding upon. As Stephen mentioned earlier, you saw on our water and sewer revenue bonds, there were more bidders. There's more interest the larger the size of the debt issuance. When you're looking at a very small debt issuance, sometimes you can't get much interest in it. By combining these two together, we assumed we would get more interest, which also helps drive down the overall interest rate.
Okay, and I won't sit up here and pretend like I fully understand how you're breaking that out on the tax rate, because to me, the $8 million tax note is what we're paying. It's $1 million interest over the next 7 years.
But if it was coming directly from our taxes, that rate would be 0.8 cents.
That is correct.
It would not be 0.4.
I thought it was 1.2 million per penny that we have in revenue. So here I'm a half a penny for $8 million in revenue.
So you are at, well, you're at you need $700,000 per year off of your property tax rate. So if you do, and it's about 1.3 in this next year.
Yeah, that's 1.2 rule of thumb I was using earlier is from a previous
From a
year. Right now we're
previous
doing
year.
about
So it's gone up a
1.361,
little bit with-
1.391, something like that.
I'm curious, how are we increasing our tax rate? Let me call it a half a penny, just for ease.
Okay.
How are we increasing that, and we're only borrowing $8 million in the way of like?
Because we're paying for the rest of it.
Yeah, go ahead and say it, Eddie.
So go ahead.
Because we're paying half of it out of the other means. So only half of it is being paid for by our taxes. The other
correct?
half
Yes.
is being paid for out of revenue.
Yes.
Okay. Last question, and then I'll quit. Do we have sales tax revenues, any other forms of payment that would be suitable? Could we pay cash for this instead of borrowing the money?
So we have had strong sales tax collections in this current year. We worked through the budget process to allocate some of the early excess collections that we got this fiscal year towards cash-funded capital projects in the proposed budget. So those have been worked through the budget process. So there are those that are still up for consideration in the proposed 22-23 budget. The cash-funded general fund projects would potentially be eligible. We do also have some projects that have not been started in the current fiscal year that might have some ability for council, if they chose to pull cash funding from them, use instead for a project like this. It would just be whatever council decided. Again, though, one of the reasons we brought this forward as an actual debt issuance that would be applied to the property tax rate is so instead of using one-time cash funding in 7 years when this tax note is fully paid for, we would still have that ongoing funding source to then refresh the software to make sure we have it upgraded properly, so we don't get 20 years down the road and have to try to find some sort of a large upfront expenditure to upgrade a software package like this.
Okay. Thank you for the explanation. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you, Laura. Do we have a motion on this item?
Yes, Mayor. I move to adopt ordinance number 8003 to authorize the issuance of City of Amarillo, Texas Tax Notes Series 2022B and resolving other matters incident and related thereto, including the approval of a paying agent/register agreement.
Second.
It's been moved by the Mayor Pro Tem and seconded by Councilmember Sauer to approve item 3E. Discussions or questions about the motion? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed?
No.
Okay, so that motion passes 4-1. And with that, let's take a break and come back in about 10 minutes to pick back up. And thank you all for the patience in jumping around on our agenda today. Where we left off is back to agenda item 1D, which Ryan's been so patient, Chief's been so patient, because this is a very important presentation. A lot of work has gone into it. So let's go ahead and move on to the presentation of gun violence trends in Amarillo. Mr. City Manager, anything you want to preface this report with?
Just a quick, a little bit more on Ryan. He's I don't want to give him too big of a head, but he's kind of a big deal. I mean, we have the luxury of having Ryan here because he's part of the Harvard City Leadership Initiative. And he's here as a summer fellow. He has Harvard master's degrees in both education and policy. So he is bringing a wealth of academic experience to our real-world problem set. And I think it's been a good experience for Ryan. I believe it's also been a good experience for our police department team. And it's going to be talking about a very real challenge that we are working on here in the city of Amarillo. So, Ryan, did I miss anything? Did I overstate anything?
Just the big deal part. Not as big of a deal.
He would never say that.
Confidence. Hey, thank you for your time, everyone. I'll hop into it. So for the past 7 weeks, I've been doing a data analysis on the violent crime rates that we have in Amarillo, specifically related to guns. I think first it's good to just scope out and look at violent crime in general, but also in the Texas Panhandle.
Hey, Ryan, let me just jump in real quick. I'm going to need you to almost kind of eat that microphone. I apologize. It's our sound is so bad in here, and some of our audience needs the help.
Better now?
Yeah, better. Thank you.
Okay, got it. Amarillo is the 4th most violent city in Texas, according to one source from the FBI. It falls behind Lubbock and Odessa. The 3rd is Corpus Christi out on the coast. The violent crime rate is about 8.36 violent crimes per 1,000 residences in the city. This is about twice the state average. And even though in 2021 we did see an overall decrease in violent crime rates, we did see a 40% increase in homicides. So Amarillo as a whole, we can see from this graph, is showing a little bit higher trends for violent crime than the Panhandle on average. Even when we think about how that has changed over time, this data is prior to the pandemic, so a little bit updated now. But even the entire Panhandle is seeing an increase in violent crime, Amarillo more so than some of the other cities that we see. A couple weeks ago, a media inquiry came into the APD. Our analyst team was able to look from 2019 onwards to really see, are we seeing more gun violence? Are we seeing more shootings in the city over these 4 years? This is a very rough estimate, very modest. It is very difficult for our record management system to give us very clean numbers on this, but this is a very good, solid foundation for understanding how shootings have happened over the past 4 years. So probably a 60% increase from 2019 to 2022 as of today. All that information was present before I got here. I did not contribute to any of that. I'll move into what I actually helped to do. But about 12 months ago, the police department changed the way they did their record management system. They added a small modification that made it easier for police officers to denote when a firearm was discharged in a case that they were investigating. This allowed us to conclude over past 12 months about 450 cases where a firearm was discharged. I was able to go through and read 450 cases of narratives, field interviews, looking through suspects and victims to really pull out some of the key trends that through geographical and statistical analysis, we were able to pull out some interesting patterns that I'll present to you today. I think it's just really important to denote that this is incomplete data. This is only information that comes from the police department. Anything that is not reported to the police, which we can expect there are, is not reflected in this data. This is only quantitative. It loses a lot of the nuance that we can also understand from these cases without doing interviews at this point. I think it's also important to note that none of the other cities in the Panhandle are doing anything like this. We can't compare to what's happening in Lubbock or Odessa. And also, we have no historical reference on this. So I think it's good to take the data I present today as a snapshot in time of what gun violence was like in Amarillo in the past 12 months. So I'm going to try to answer the questions of how much, where, what, and who of gun violence in the city over the past 12 months. Starting with how much, we were able to find 355 shootings over the past 12 months. If we look over a 9-month span where we knew that new firearm discharge tick box was used with fidelity, that equates to about 1.2 shootings per day. I looked it up this morning. In the past 48 hours, there have actually been 4 shootings just from today into the past 2 days. That would change that number to about 1.2 shootings per 12 hours. So a pretty significant rate. This cracks down to be about a gun violence rate of 1.75 shootings per 1,000 individuals. This is higher than Amarillo's robbery rate. It is higher than our rape rate. It is higher than our murder rate. There is no part of the city that is devoid of gun violence. There are places that see it more often, though. This is not the best graph to see from afar, but the red shows where we have a propensity of gun violence to occur. The darker blue sections show where it is least likely. So we see that we have, quote unquote, cold spots that happen in the western, eastern, and southern outskirts of the city, with kind of north central being the hotspot areas of where we see most of our gun violence to occur. When we break this down by the different quadrants of the city, the north and the west hold a disproportionate amount of this gun violence proportional to the size that they actually occupy. A majority of gun-related homicides occurs in the northern neighborhood. A majority of the gun-related domestic disputes occur in the western neighborhood. When we were able to do some simple correlational statistical analysis, we see that neighborhoods that have greater gun violence also have higher unemployment, higher poverty, less home ownership, and less educational attainment. When we look at what actually consists of the shootings that occur, a majority of these cases happen in aggravated assaults where a gun is specifically used to inflict harm on another individual, followed by vandalism, then aggravated robbery, and then homicide. Almost over a third of all these shootings were done in a drive-by occurrence where a firearm was shot from a moving vehicle. These are especially difficult for the police to track down and get solid, valid information on, so that poses another issue for the APD as well. Out of the 355 cases that we identified, we were able to locate 176 valid suspects, which kind of gives us a nice sample size to actually conclude what are we looking at as our shooter profile over the past 12 months. Over 50% of the shooters were under the age of 25. About a fifth of them were school age, so 18 and younger. Overwhelmingly male, almost 90%. About a fifth of them are registered in TexGang, which is Texas's state federal identification system for gang members. And on average, most of them do have a quite colored history with the APD. So an average of 10 past offenses, both violent and nonviolent, and 3 past violent offenses. When we think of the racial demographics, this occurs across every racial group. In the past 12 months, the majority of our shooters were Hispanic, followed by black individuals, followed by white individuals. Disproportionately, though, our shooters are black, proportionate to the makeup that they have within the city overall. When we look at who gets shot, though, it's a slightly different demographic. So a majority of the intended victims or targets of shootings in Amarillo tend to be civilians who are not related to the shooter via blood or an intimate partnership. This is followed by property, inanimate objects that are being the targets of shootings, then followed by blood relatives and domestic partners. We see that almost in half of the cases where the APD does know the motive behind why a shot was fired. This is motivated by a domestic dispute of some kind. Gun violence victims are on average more likely to be older than their shooters, and they're more likely to be women than shooters are as well. And then shootings are equally likely to happen within racial groups as they are across them, which kind of tells you that in Amarillo there's no clear racial patterns that dictate why shootings happen in our city. So that's a general overview, and then I'll try to break down kind of how I've concluded what the major takeaways are and how I'm kind of dictating my next couple of weeks here as I move forward with my research. This pie chart shows that in all of the cases that we looked at, over 50% of them, 50.6, APD was not able to locate a motive for why the shooting happened, wasn't able to locate a suspect for who did the shooting, sometimes couldn't even locate the victim or the intended target of why that shooting occurred. This is a huge gap in our knowledge. It really prevents us from keeping people safe, but also from understanding why gun violence is happening in the city, and ends up being a total of 180 shootings that go unsolved or unresolved over the span of a year. This, we can expect, will get better with the development of the real-time crime center that's being developed in the APD, but it also shows us that we have a dire need for improving the cooperation we have with our community, which will only get preceded by a better relationship between citizens and the police and citizens and their government. On the other hand, I can't denote that we do know a lot about the gun violence cases that we do see. A little under half, we actually do know the motive of the suspect and a few finer details that give us a little bit of an insight into what we're looking at. In 82.3% of all these cases, we can pull back why the shooting occurred to one of 4 different factors, if not more. And those are gangs, youth offenders, drive-bys, and domestic violence. So in 82% of all the cases that we do have a little bit more information on, we can conclude that they are rooted in one of these four things, if not more. So one of the things that I'm helping the PD do, and I hope to turn over to City Council as well, is thinking about how do you think about these four elements as major levers in reducing crime in the city, but also think of them from a public health circumstance. What's on the presentation now is what's called a Hayden matrix. It's taken from public health theory. It breaks down any violent offense into three stages where a city agency, a nonprofit, can intervene. It's the intervention, the prevention of actually allowing that shot to be fired, the clearance and the prosecution of that offender once they have been caught, determined, and then also the rehabilitation of that offender once they've been caught, and the healing of their victims and the community that they've perpetrated in. What I would like to conclude with is just zooming into one of those factors, which I think has some interesting data points for the council to consider. Youth crime has been attributed to being one of the leading causes for why the violent crime rates in the U.S. has come up. A lot of media sources have gone out and said the reason that we see more shootings is because we have more youth who are committing these shootings. In a lot of cases, that's proven to not actually be reflected in the data, and in Amarillo specifically, that's also reflected to not be in the data. So this graph here shows the amount of crimes that were committed by youth over the past 5 years in Amarillo. We are far below what we used to see via the pandemic, moving from about 2,900 to just about 2,100 as of this year. The thing that is worth noting, though, is that the nature of crime in Amarillo committed by youth is changing. And when we look at the amount of crimes that are committed by youth, which are of a violent nature, that percentage has gone up quite drastically since the pre-pandemic level, moving from 31% of all crimes to 39% of all crimes. This kind of identifies that although maybe youths are not committing more crimes in the city, the nature of what they are trying to perpetrate is becoming more and more violent, which is both a problem for them and a problem for us as a city at large, and dictates that we need to focus on them as a major lever for improvement. One of the things that I'll do in my next 3 weeks is really zone in on what this map shows here, which is a propensity, a concentration of where at-risk youth live in the city that have been determined to have a colored past with APD, and probably will have a propensity for increased violent crime unless they have solid social support from the city and outside agencies. My goal is to look in these three neighborhoods where we have this propensity, that's Hamlet, North Heights, and East Ridge, and consider what are the current social services these kids have available to them, how does the city move in and support those agencies to both be better on their own but also be better together as well. So in conclusion, if I could leave you with anything, it's good to know that gun violence in Amarillo is real, it's high, and it's expected to increase. This predominantly affects Amarillo's northern neighborhood, but also communities that also face many other challenges, namely poverty and unemployment. The APD has limited information on this gun violence, and that would not be expected to increase unless we rapidly improve our capacity to gain criminal intel and or improve community cooperation. And lastly, of what we know, 4 of the main driving factors of this violence is domestic violence, drive-bys, youth crime, and gangs. Thank you.
Ryan, thank you very much. Council, questions or dialogue you want to have with Ryan?
I didn't know if Chief Birkenfeld wanted to say something
yes.
or come up and add some color or flavor.
Well, I do want to say I appreciate Ryan being so thorough. You know, I've seen reports over the years, and sometimes you see mediocre stuff. This is excellent. It really gives us another, like you said, a snapshot of what's going on in Amarillo. We already know some of this stuff, but it also kind of gives us a map to move forward, either knowing that we're moving in the wrong direction or the right direction. Clearly, there's some of both in here. So we're going to use this as another tool to develop our strategies and perfect our strategies to continue, because I'm not willing, and I know our city's not willing, and our community's not willing to just throw our hands up and say, well, violent crime's up across the nation, there's nothing we can do. I really do believe we can do some things in our city to buck that trend, and that's what we're committed to do.
Chief, I also wanted to see if we had any uniformed or civilian personnel that have been instrumental to what Ryan's been doing.
Absolutely.
That you could recognize for us.
First of all, Haley Hernandez is our crime analyst supervisor. She's been with us a few years. She left for a minute and came back as a supervisor, but she was instrumental in
helping Ryan get this data put together. Captain Brown also was instrumental. I assigned Ryan to Captain Brown for guidance in getting our data. And there's probably several other people. I knew Lieutenant Gross is the leader of our our violent crime unit, and he had to contribute a lot of information. There's probably dozens of other people that you talk to, both in the department and the community, that help contribute information. So if I left any major players out,
I'll send a list. There's not a lot.
Okay, well, that would be great. We'd love to see a list. And I'll just say right off the bat that this is council's job is to provide basic city services for our citizens, and providing a safe city to live in really is the most basic of basic. And when we have the opportunity to participate in the Harvard program, and this door opened for the opportunity to have a Harvard research summer program, we were interested, and the police department was very interested in doing it on gun violence in our city, really. And we were doing that even before our numbers were changing so drastically in this last year, because the conversation to get this project started happened about 10 months ago. So I just want to say kudos to Jared and his visionary approach to leading city staff to say, yes, if this is an opportunity that we can pursue getting Ryan, we didn't know at the time it would be you, Ryan, but getting someone here that had, and Ryan, I'll let you speak to how long you've been here and how many weeks you've been researching it, but at no cost to the city. This is something that was provided through a grant, and his expenses have been covered not by taxpayer dollars, but by grant-funded dollars. And because of that, we have an independent snapshot of where Amarillo is right now with regard to this crime. And so kudos to the city manager for opening that opportunity for us. Kudos to the department and to your leadership chief for saying, hey, come and look at our data. Haley, thank you. Because we want to make it better. And that's part of what I love about your leadership, Chief, is that you lead with your heart, and your heart is for our city to be safer. And for those people, both the victims, but the perpetrators of these crimes, life is destroyed either way. And so I really appreciate that you have brought resources and opened doors for Ryan to be able to give us this snapshot. I think it is giving us new data, and it's thought-provoking, and we have to now make a plan on how to act on it. But anything else you want to say on that, Councilmember Stanley?
Just a quick question. Did we track, and do we have the same amount of assaults and conflict, and our youth are predominantly choosing to solve these with gun violence instead of, another form of resolution?
If we're looking at youth only, I looked at every single offense that a under 17-year-old has been accused of over the past 5 years. We have some record numbers that are hitting this year: aggravated sexual assaults, arson, but aggravated assaults committed by youth are moving down. Again, we don't know always from our data sources if we can determine if all those assaults are being committed with firearms or not. But from what we can tell, is that doesn't seem to be the driving force. But I still don't think that negates that youth deserve a lot of attention when we think about this problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Questions from this end of the dais?
No, ma'am.
Yeah. Ryan, how long have you been here in Amarillo?
I've been here 7 weeks. I leave in 3. It's been short and sweet, but very enjoyable.
Okay, 7 weeks spent in our police department looking at all our data. You and Haley data diving. We really appreciate the work. I think we have a question from Councilmember Smith.
No, just a statement.
Okay.
I want to say to the police chief, I appreciate what your department does for us. Seems like every few days there's an incident that takes place. I don't know how any community could defund their police. Thanks for what you do.
I appreciate it. It's a privilege to be here in Amarillo. I've lived here my whole life, and I wouldn't want to go anywhere else. But your support makes all the difference in the world. The community support makes it much more rewarding to be able to do our jobs, and that's what I feel. I also neglected to mention that I know Mayor Nelson opened some doors to make this happen, and Jennifer also helped when we were first interviewing several candidates. It was tough because you were competing a bunch of smart people there, but
Yeah.
we ended up picking Ryan out, and thanks Jennifer, and also Kat was helping.
Yes, thank you for calling them out, Chief. Jenny Ramirez and Kat Massey both worked very hard on getting our proposal ready to submit for applicants. We had lots of applicants who said they want to come to Amarillo. So, Ryan, we picked you as the top of the heap, and I think this report shows that we made a good pick. None of us are happy about what this issue is or what it's showing us, but it does give us hope for knowing that we can make a strategy, and I trust the people in our police department to execute on that strategy. And there's a part of me that wants you to come back in a few years and do this again, because I think it will show that we've made progress. Yeah, Mr. City Manager.
I think one thing that's important recognizing for both Ryan and for our police team, it's never easy for any police department to have someone come in from outside and have unfettered access to all of your data and draw their own conclusions. Sorry, I wasn't speaking into the lit microphone. I was speaking into the microphone. It just wasn't on, James. But I do think that I want to commend our team, our APD team, because there was never any hesitancy to open up every file in every case that we have to analysis. And on Ryan's part, there was never any agenda other than to help identify where we have opportunities. I think it corroborated what our APD team already knew and already knows and is dealing with on a day in, day out, night in, night out basis. All that to say, I appreciate our APD team and our outside input for working effectively together to help give us better clarity and resolution on our challenges and what our specific paths for improvement, where opportunities might be. Because Chief, I bet you and your team could say, yeah, that corroborates what we knew, but empirically being able to say, yeah, this is exactly what's going on, where it's going on, who's doing it, and then I'd be able to identify some possible opportunities and avenues to make inroads is a huge achievement on both parties' parts. So thank you, and thank you. And to you, thank you to everyone behind you.
Absolutely.
Literally behind you.
Yeah, absolutely. On behalf of the citizens, we would echo that. We appreciate your work here, Ryan, and I look forward to seeing your conclusions about the youth that you're going to be working on the next couple of weeks. But, Chief, couldn't agree more with what Jared just said, and we appreciate you and your department so much. Oh, okay, thank you. Moving on to item 1E, requesting future agenda items or reports from the city manager. Does anybody have anything? Okay. It's strange to be at this point in the meeting. We're just not getting to consent. We've been doing a lot of jumping around. Anything there that needs to come off for further discussion or questions?
Mayor, if you'd be kind enough to pull Y off for a discussion. That is the item for the fiber optic directional drilling.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Do we have a motion with regard to the consent agenda?
Yes, Mayor, we do. I move to approve the consent agenda with the corrections to the minutes, item 2 on the consent agenda for the minutes as presented.
Okay, we have a motion by the Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by Councilmember Sauer. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes with a 5-0 vote. Item Y, off of the consent agenda, Mr. City Manager.
All right, Mayor, I'm going to ask Assistant City Manager Rich Guyon to come up and present the item and answer any questions council might have. Rich?
Thank you. Let me start by clarifying. Item Y is not authorizing the expenditure of any city funds or any city budget. What it is it is the culmination of a vendor selection process whereby we chose what vendor we would use for the next year to execute any fiber projects the city may have. So, for example, in a new city hall, there's a line item for connectivity to connect the building back to our network. that's a budget that gets approved by council. Then all that this does is it determines what vendor we'll be using for the next year, with the option to use that vendor again the year after that. The numbers that you see on it are a cap. They're a limit. So what that does is that prevents us from misusing that contract. If suddenly we had a need to run $5 million worth of fiber, we would have to renegotiate that, and with good reason, because we would want a better discount based on the bulk purchase of their services. So all this is much like we do with our AV contracts. We have a contract with an AV provider, so when we light up a new conference room, that budget item is brought to council, approved, and we've already selected what vendor we're going to use.
Thank you, sir. If I could, I had a couple of citizens that reached out to me on this, and so more for a point of clarity than anything else. So what we're saying is this is a procedural. It's included in the proposed budget. Is that correct?
Correct. So this is just selecting the vendor, but the actual budget item, so the fiber for City Hall is in the budget, or for transit. The fiber for transit is a line item in Transit's budget. There's no additional budget that comes with this.
So this does not free up $1 million worth of monies out of the budget if we didn't do this. Meaning,
exactly.
This is monies that you have put into the budget per the departments based on needs that they need. And then this is not a private internet line in the way of like AT&T, Verizon. It's not anything that any company can utilize. This would be a line dedicated, a hard line, let's say, from one building to the next for our purposes of communication only.
Correct. Internal only. So it's to connect new facilities to our existing network. And you're exactly right. It's just procedure on how we select the vendor that will be doing those jobs. It's not adding any budget. This is just how we fulfill work that is already budgeted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I think that basically covers it. I think my biggest.
Do we have? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do we have a motion on it then? I'm sorry. Do you have another comment? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, thank you. I think we explained it. Thank you. Appreciate it, Rich.
Okay. You want to make the motion?
Okay.
You want me to read the hey, you know what? We don't have one to read. So, yes, I'd like to move that we approve item I to consider the award for fiber optic directional drilling services.
Is that I or Y?
Item Y.
Item Y.
Why?
Okay, it's been moved by Councilmember Stanley and approved by Councilmember Smith to approve item Y on the consent agenda. Any conversation or discussion, questions about that motion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes with a 5-0 vote. Thank you. All right, moving on to Section 3 of our agenda. 3A is consideration of resolution number 081622-5. Mr. City Manager.
All right, Mayor, the next two items, we're going to be talking about proposed city legislative agenda, which is much like our previous 3 or 4 years legislative agendas. We're also going to be talking about TML, Texas Municipal League legislative policy recommendations, which are very typically only going to be things that every city would get on board with, because TML will only sponsor things or only endorse things that they don't have cities arguing with each other about. So these are going to be things that are very basic. So Andrew Freeman, Assistant City Manager, is going to go over both of these things. He is our he manages our legislative agenda and is also our liaison to Texas Municipal League as far as legislative policy. So Andrew, we're going to start with 3A. We'll take action from council, and then we'll move to 3B. So go ahead.
Sounds good. So as Jared mentioned, this is a policy or priorities that have come to council in the last 2 or 3 city councils to give direction. Really, it's to give direction to city staff as well as our legislative consultants, both at the state and federal level, so they really have the marching orders from council as far as what the group as a whole supports, so they can keep an eye on things and be prepared as things are presented in bills that go through the legislature. So a lot of this is just in preparation of the next session, not knowing what bills are coming, what might be filed, and a lot of it were on previous legislative priorities. So first off, there are the general principles that City Council would be adopting in this policy as far as supporting anything that enhances the ability for the city to solve problems, improving quality of life for the citizens, as well as any initiatives from partners in the community that would enhance educational, cultural, and infrastructure resources in the region. And then there are a few things that the city just generally does oppose as it comes forward. Anything that increases the city's costs, anything that reduces the city's authority, and anything that burdens Amarillo taxpayers with unfunded mandates, which are some of the things that have come through recent legislative sessions. Now, I've got the bullets from the legislative priorities. So in front of you on the dais is the full document. There's also included a red line version. We did spend a good amount of time at your budget workshop going through each of these, so I'll try and keep it a little brief as I walk through them. Feel free to stop and ask questions or go into more detail with each item. I will touch on the ones that are redline your document. Those are the things that we heard that you might want additional changes to the document or additional items that we researched and added to this latest version of the priorities. So first up, of course, is transportation, which is a big topic here in Amarillo. This touches on things like completing the building of Loop 335. It also supports the expansion and ongoing discussions related to I-27 to the north and to the south. And we also added in, not included in previous versions, was to provide and support legislation that would add the co-designation of Interstate 40 as MLK or Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Highway into your document. The next one is pro-family policy. This is a new addition to the priorities. This is supporting legislation to strengthen resources, provide to new mothers and new families that live in the city of Amarillo. Things like rehabilitating the foster care system, reducing barriers to private adoption, lessening the time commitment and paperwork surrounding both private and public adoption, just to really add more emphasis to the pro-family policies that the state might enact. Next up, we've got property tax, debt, and sales tax. A lot of this was from previous language that has continued on as far as opposing legislation that disproportionately impacts the city of Amarillo and our low tax rate compared to other cities in the state. Would unnecessarily restrict the ability to issue debt or impose additional undue burdens on debt issuance, and also would oppose revenue caps that lowered the voter approval tax rate that's been set in previous sessions, as well as mandatory tax rate elections. There is additional language added related to sales tax sourcing. Not knowing what might come into the legislative session, we kept that one a little more broad as far as not having a detrimental impact to the city's annual budget, because it could be a matter of sourcing where the product is sold versus where it's delivered, and there might be a mixture of the two. So we just want to be on our toes as far as whatever benefits Amarillo moving forward. Next up, annexation. This would oppose legislation that would further restrict or impose more stringent requirements on the municipal authority to annex land. This has already come through previous legislation, so it's already been pretty narrowed down that we don't have much ability to annex land. This is just to keep, hopefully, from that getting any more difficult moving forward. Expansion of broadband internet. This is, of course, an ongoing project for the city of Amarillo. This is just to support legislation that would continue to address that digital divide, provide elimination of financial barriers for the citizens that are trying to access broadband internet. Right-of-way and small cell towers. This is also a continuation, supporting legislation that allows for more control of municipal right-of-way, allowing to charge fees as far as market rate to use the right-of-way, and also authority over the small cell nodes that currently are allowed to basically go up wherever they choose to be on existing and future infrastructure. Next up is open meetings and open records. This would be as far as clarification on public information laws and communication between elected officials and their constituents. As far as, in particular, as far as open meetings, is the use of technology for virtual meetings. Currently, there is some language that allows some of that, but is very strict and has certain requirements on how you're able to set that up. So we saw the benefit of being able to use Zoom and other products during COVID, and would like to see the state continue to explore that option. We have also have a general statement as far as opposing legislation that would make current open meetings and public information laws more restrictive or ambiguous. Virtual court, that is a new one from budget workshops as far as supporting legislation that would continue or expand our municipal court's ability to offer virtual court hearings. Those are currently still being used, but it's not known whether that's going to be permanent or could go away. It's been very beneficial for the court as far as being able to resolve some of those cases and give folks an opportunity. It could be somebody that just got a ticket passing through on the way to the West Coast, and they can come in and have a virtual court hearing versus having to be in person. Disasters and emergencies, that one is really about providing for and enhancing local control during disasters and emergencies, whether that's public safety, emergency management, public communications, public health, or other levels responding to disasters and emergencies. Economic development is a carryover, but we've added some additional language, particularly as it relates to supporting legislation for Palo Duro State Park as far as increasing that asset to allow for greater tourism, whether that's adding a second entrance to the park, hiring more personnel, or allowing more accessible land for park visitors to enjoy. We also added supporting the Route 66 Centennial Commission for the 100th anniversary of Route 66, which is coming up in 2026, as well as including that the city and our local partners are continuing to seek funding opportunities to support that anniversary. And we also added language as far as prohibiting the sale or limiting the sale of land in the Texas Panhandle or the rest of the state to the Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party, or the Chinese nationals affiliated with these two entities. This is some language that we are seeing in multiple states in the U.S., something that Texas may see come up in this next legislative session. We also have a more elaborate section on mental health. It touches on supporting funding to build a state mental hospital in Amarillo, increased intervention and funds resource for persons who are suffering from mental illness, supporting training for law enforcement, mental health caseworkers, and being able to aid more in the crisis response to those individuals. Panhandling is another new topic as far as supporting legislation and protecting and expanding the city's ability to improve public safety measures of residents and solicitors that use not only the city but state right-of-way as well, and allowing law enforcement to redirect solicitors to Panhandle in safer locations. And then next up, we've got the Amarillo Civic Center complex. This is also a carryover item as far as supporting legislation to finance the renovation or revitalization or expansion of the Civic Center. That was just an ongoing item to try and find other funding sources beyond just general tax dollars. We did have the specific language added as far as the ability to add an additional 2% of hot tax. Currently, there are communities in Texas that have carve-outs in the legislation that allows coastal cities and other, based on population, the ability to go up to that. If this was ever adjusted, that would actually have to be something that comes back to the council. Once they have the ability to actually raise the tax, they would have to vote on that separately. So it's nothing as far as committing anything at this point. Elections and ballot language, that's supporting legislation that broadens the naming conventions required for propositions on election ballots. Currently, we're required to use alphabetical. In previous sessions before the change, you could use numerical as well. That has been switched, and we just know that we've gotten some comments from folks thinking it's the exact same item, that we've already voted on Prop A once. Why are we voting on Prop A again? So that is a concern we have received. Public advertising, that would support legislation to enable the use of electronic notice for public notices versus just newspaper notices being the requirement and the standard today. Water resources, that's an ongoing supporting legislation to expand our ability to purchase water and provide water to residents and customers. And then the last for the state legislation is opposing any additional legislation that would limit the abilities of cities in rural Texas who are geographically distanced from the capital to communicate with legislatures and advocate on behalf of their rural communities. We've discussed this in the past as far as it's very difficult for those in the Panhandle to access the Austin legislatures and be in regular communication on their agendas as they go through the process. So I'll take a break there on state priorities, see if you have any questions before I move to federal. I also have a couple of asterisks on there as far as the Civic Center complex and the elections and ballot language. Those were the two TML items that we are proposing to submit through their process. So I'll touch on that on the next agenda item.
And the whole purpose of this is to help guide city staff as we work on these initiatives with Representatives Smithy, Price, Senator Seliger, and now
Kevin
Sparks.
Senator Sparks. There are frequent occasions where one of those will ask us for input on how a particular legislation will affect our residents, and we provide that feedback, that statistical or analysis for them because they want to know how legislation is going to affect their constituents. We're one of the biggest repositories of constituents that they have. It doesn't matter which one we're talking about. We're one of the biggest that they have, if not the biggest. So that happens frequently. The other things are occasionally we're asked to go to Austin to provide input on these things. Now, we're going to stay out of things, and from a staff level, we're going to stay out of things that are very, very controversial. However, like transportation, like pro-family policy, like annexation, broadband, all these other things that are where we have universal support from our council on these items, we will go down and just provide fact-based information and input that is not designed to in any way stray or deviate from what council's guidance is. So none of this is proposed to put us out on a limb. We want to make sure that everything we're doing is what council wants us to be doing. So this document helps guide staff as we work with elected officials, statewide elected officials, and also with those in Austin who can help council and communities' cause with regard to legislation being considered in Austin during the upcoming legislative session. Is there any questions council has for Andrew or for me or for anybody else on this?
Questions?
Well, Mayor, a point of order or point of procedure, we did notice this page 1 on the draft says Exhibit A. That was brought up earlier. Exhibit A was not included in this agenda. So I'd like staff's opinion or recommendation on postpone this for 2 weeks in order to get everything exactly correct in the agenda? Or can we get an opinion on safe to move forward even though it wasn't posted and wasn't presented?
The consideration of the item is posted. Exhibit A not being in the document that was posted is not something that would prohibit us from approving the legislative agenda as presented. Now, Brian can provide city attorney can provide some feedback if it's different from what I've just said. But we can do it now, or if council wants to delay, we can do it then. Or we can make any adjustments and incorporate those adjustments as approved or as directed from council right now. But the lack of having that in the packet and being provided to y'all at the dais is not something that would prohibit us.
I would like to get Mr. McWilliams' opinion on it if I could.
And if I may add a quick point of reference, the Exhibit A was provided to council in an email on Friday as part of the city manager report.
Thank you, Stephanie. Brian?
It doesn't impact it at all. You can take action today if you wish.
Okay.
And from a staff perspective, there's not a hard deadline as far as the legislative priorities. There is a hard deadline on the TML items because those are due August 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, the policy could come back.
So without a deadline, I would move to postpone for 2 weeks just due to the fact that it wasn't presented for the citizens to review.
Do you want me to touch on the federal first before?
We need to vote on
He's only talking about 3A.
Just 3A, just moving to
But
postpone
federal's part of
3A.
3A. I didn't touch on the federal priorities
Yeah,
yet.
we just need to vote on 3A right now.
Oh, no. The federal priorities are part of 3A.
Yes.
So we need to get through we only did the statewide. If y'all are
But
okay,
you
we can
have
do
a
the federal
motion,
first.
So I won't intervene.
I want to second that motion and explain why. Because one of the persons that spoke earlier, the citizens didn't get that. And I think they need to have the opportunity to see it.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Okay. We have a motion on the table to postpone taking action. Doesn't mean that we can't continue to discuss and give feedback to you with regard to, I'm looking at the draft. Are these the same?
Yes, one just has the red lines of the changes since the
Okay,
budget
got
workshop.
it. All right.
And the federal agenda is extensive.
Okay. So 3A that was the motion, but I'm not seeing how that correlates to what's listed here in the agenda. Andrew, help me with that.
So 3A is the legislative priorities, both state and federal, on the same document. 3B is the TML resolution support. Of
it relates to the agenda. Okay, I was looking for a 3A reference in this document.
No.
I was like, I am not following here. Okay, got it. Yes. No, I understand. So I do think it would still be beneficial for us to finish hearing your presentation, just to talk about. If y'all don't mind, we'll pause then on calling the question on just postponing that vote and let Andrew finish. Before you finish, Andrew, I would like to just make a couple of comments on things that are on our state agenda. One is that hot tax. Other cities have that option. And that, as we've worked through how to solve the Civic Center problem, and I know there are a lot of opinions in our community about the Civic Center, but at least 4 incumbents ran on that in 2021 back in May, and we were clear that it was a problem. It costs us money, thousands of dollars every day to subsidize that property, and it is a problem. What we have tried to do is find a way to solve the problem with the infrastructure needs that need to be addressed in the Civic Center without it landing on the taxpayer, on the property taxpayer. And what we discovered in that year-long process of looking for other options through the Garfield report is that some other cities have this additional hotel occupancy tax that we don't have access to here in Amarillo, even though we have a very robust tourism, especially for one-night stay off of I-40. We have a very robust stock of that opportunity. So we really had the taxpayer in mind, the property taxpayer in mind, when we put that on the legislative agenda. And we would just like to have the same opportunity that some other Texas cities have to collect more in HOT as a way of not burdening our property taxpayers. And so I wanted to just give a little more background on how that was put on the agenda. It was something that I was very interested in. It would help us decrease our property tax rate, which is a benefit to every property taxpayer, including hotel property tax owners. Hotel owners who also pay significant property tax bills. And it would be to support a project that actually increases our tourism. So we would generate more hotel stays, more business, general business, restaurant business, by having people in the city for the events in the Civic Center. So as I see it, it's a win-win for someone who is currently paying property tax and would benefit, whatever your business is. If your business would benefit by having more tourists in our city, then this would be an opportunity for us to advocate. But we don't even have that option right now. Other Texas cities have it. We do not have it. And so what we're asking for is the legislature would just even the playing field and give us the same opportunity that other Texas cities have been given, so that then we could begin as a council to analyze whether or not that is an option, and it would benefit our property taxpayers by letting us do that project without having to raise property tax rates. That was the end goal. So I was a little bit surprised today to see the response in the room, but I think maybe we hadn't said out loud. We hadn't had a chance to say out loud, why is that on the agenda and how did that get on the agenda?
When I compare it to the tourism public improvement district language, previously only Metroplex cities and a handful, maybe 5 cities that were allowed to use it until the 2019 session changed that language. So
and Amarillo was part of the driver in that change.
Correct.
We were the driver, yeah. As to elections, we have had multiple citizen inquiries over the last couple of times we've done an election, calling confused, saying we've already voted on this Prop A, why is Prop A back on the ballot? And then I had at least one citizen who came to me and said, I think this is a problem would you consider adding this to the legislative agenda, just so that we would have more flexibility in how we name those, odd years, 1, 2, 3, name them as numbers, Prop 1, Prop 2, even years, name them as letters, just something to create a little bit more space so that it's not Prop A on top of Prop A on top of Prop A, so that citizens are confused from election to election as to what they're voting on. So I wanted, again, just to provide some background on how did that end up on the agenda. That's something that I've received a lot of email and phone calls and questions about, and so that's how that got there. Any other comments people want before we hear the federal? Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Yes, ma'am. Federal, so I put an asterisk on all these because we did make a lot of changes since the budget workshop, more just to beef up the language and add some more information on a lot of these topics, and then a few new ones. Crossbar Ranch was added. That's the Bureau of Land Management land, the 12,000 acres north of town. So we just highlighted the supporting legislation to increase or provide additional funding for the development of that property. Whether it's replacement of the train trestle, widening, and improvements to an existing access road, or for developing the interior road network to support visitor access to the property. We also added a category for U.S. Department of Defense and U.S. Department of Energy, supporting legislation that continues to invest in the areas of defense and energy related to agency initiatives or increased funding to support Pantex, Bell, or other companies that work in these industry sectors. Transportation, really the next few, transportation through community development is all about supporting the implementation of recent legislation, the bipartisan infrastructure law as it relates to transportation funding, and all the priorities related to our international airport, highway system, emergency management spending, federal dollars, either through FEMA, HUD, Economic Development Administration. Public safety is for federal grant programs, advanced police and fire public safety programs, overall emergency management operations, enhancing the power grid infrastructure, resiliency and reliability. And then technology is supporting efforts to secure federal broadband deployment funds, securing federal funding included for cybersecurity needs for state and local governments. So that was all just, these are the things we contract with Normandy to go out and find these funding and grant opportunities. So we wanted to highlight more specifics as far as each of those categories. Community development was a carryover from previous when it relates to our community development block grants and home partnership funds. Continued support for tax credit and historic properties, similar to the Commons at St. Anthony's project that benefited from that program. Increasing incentives for the redevelopment of city neighborhoods and needed revitalization that would hopefully support our neighborhood plan areas. And then we add a couple items as far as increased funding for park-related projects and demolishing blighted structures under that category. And then lastly was an economic development category to continue to support some of these recent economic development deals to build off that synergy. It would be to support legislation aimed at creating a Texas-based rare earth metals exchange that would allow for more economic growth in Texas and for further decoupling from China for the United States. The creation of this exchange is vital to the national defense and security of the U.S. as well as the economic future of the city of Amarillo. So just ongoing economic development support for some of these new industries that we are bringing to town through AEDC.
I want to say, just with the possible exception of the last one, economic development, this is not about affecting or influencing federal policy. This is about directing staff to take every effort possible to work with all of our partners to get as much money as possible. There are billions, if not trillions, really, of existing and new monies that have been put into this last budget for transportation, for public safety, for technology, community development, all these different categories. And we want to maximize the benefit for the city of Amarillo and for the Panhandle. Like you were saying earlier, we are a regional hub, but we are also something that benefits the entire Panhandle. So we want, this money will be spent somewhere. So we want to maximize the amount that's spent in the Panhandle. So this is not about influencing federal policy, but maximizing the benefit that comes to the Panhandle from existing federal policy.
Questions, council? Do we have a motion with regard to item 3B?
Mayor, you have a motion.
Got a motion on the floor. Sorry,
Already.
thank you. Let's call the
Let
question.
me,
Yes?
let me make a comment.
Sure.
He made the motion, I second it. I don't have any problem with any of this, except I think it's not right to go around the public. They need an opportunity, and they didn't see this ahead of time. And I would approve this in 2 weeks, just like it is.
If I could speak to that as well, Mayor, I don't believe I have any issues with it either. I do like the opportunity for our public to be able to speak on it, and that's the one thing that we missed here today.
Okay, all those in favor of postponing item, action on item 3A, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that passes with a 5-0 vote. And Mr. City Manager, I would direct that be placed on the next City Council agenda.
We will have it there, and we will include the document as presented today in the packet for you. We had been making adjustments up until the last minute, so that's why it wasn't in the packet this time.
Okay, and with regard to item 3B, is there any further presentation on that matter, Andrew?
No, it was just a little more detail. TML has their annual meeting in October, and they spend that time adopting their policy for the next legislative session. So what they do is allow cities to present resolutions for consideration. That could be either for TML to support it if someone else were to bring a bill forward. It could also be for them to try and find someone to seek introduction and passage. It could be to oppose, or it could be to have no stand on the topic. So they do have the guidance of it making it something that affects multiple cities. It's a broad topic, so it's not really for 1 or 2 cities. It's really statewide benefits. So that's why we presented the introduce and pass option for the election code changes as far as the alphabet versus numerical requirements, and then supporting a bill for the additional hot tax to allow all cities to at least be able to consider that.
Yeah, and so TML will never, Texas Municipal League will never pick up an item where cities are opposed with each other. But cities will not be opposed on the clarifications on ballot initiatives, nor would they be opposed, I don't believe, to cities having the opportunity to decide whether or not they want to take on the additional hotel occupancy taxes. It does not compel or require or anything like that. It gives local control, and that's going to be something that will resonate statewide. Correct. So that's why it's included on this.
Okay. Any questions for Andrew, Council, about that? Thank you, Andrew. This is a tremendous amount of work that you guys have put into this, months of analyzing, researching, thinking ahead around all the corners. So really appreciate the work that you've put into putting this agenda together for us.
Yes, definitely a team effort.
Yeah, well, okay. With regard to item 3B, do we have a motion?
Yes, Mayor, we do. I move to adopt resolution number 08-16-22-6, adopting policy recommendations for inclusion in the 2023-2024 Texas Municipal League legislative policy.
Second.
It's been moved by the Mayor Pro Tem and seconded by Council Member Smith to approve item 3B. Any questions or discussion on that motion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? That passes with the 5-0 vote. And that is actually the last thing on our agenda today. So with that, we are adjourned, and thank you all very much for your work.
All right.
It's a good meeting.
Yeah.